Welcome back, dear listener. If you are here, then perhaps the night has done to you what it has done to so very many others, across so many quiet centuries. It has gently, patiently refused to let you go. You are lying in the dark, and sleep, which ought to have come hours ago to gather you softly up and carry you off, has wandered away somewhere beyond your reach, out past the edge of the room, out into the night, and left you here, awake, listening to the small settling sounds of the house, to the slow and even rhythm of your own breathing, to the long unhurried turning of the hours that no longer seem to belong to you. And so tonight we are going to keep company with all the others who have lain awake exactly as you are lying now, the countless men and women of the past, the peasants and the monks and the widows and the kings, who knew this very hour, this very stillness, this same soft ache of a mind that simply will not switch itself off, and who lay in their own dark, in their own beds, beneath their own silent ceilings, waiting, as you are waiting, for sleep to remember them at last. We are going to go back, slowly, gently, into the deep nights of long ago, into a world with no clock ticking on the wall, no pale glow of any screen, no distant hum of traffic moving far across a sleeping city, no glow of a street lamp at the window, only the dark, and the cold, and the wakeful, and the long sleepless hours that the night laid down before them, and the many soft, homely, half-forgotten things that they did to fill those hours, and to ease their churning minds, and to coax their tired bodies down, in the end, into rest. You must understand, first of all, that the night they lay within was nothing at all like the night you know. When the last candle was pinched out between wet fingers, when the last red ember in the hearth crumbled down at last into grey and powdery ash, the darkness that closed over a medieval room was a darkness so deep and so complete that a person could hold their own hand a finger's width before their own open eyes and see nothing of it whatsoever. No shape, no shadow, no faint pale suggestion of fingers against the black. Nothing at all but the same unbroken velvet dark, whether the eyes were open or whether they were closed. There was no soft amber square of light thrown up onto the ceiling. There was no thin bright line leaking beneath the door. There was only the dark, vast and close and total, pressing in warm against the face, and within that dark a world made entirely of sound. For when the eyes can see nothing, the ears open wide, and the wakeful lay there and listened to a night far louder, in its own hushed way, than ours. They heard the wind working at the thatch, feeling along the roof, finding the loose place and worrying at it. They heard the timbers of the house tick and settle as the cold of the night drew the warmth of the day out of the old wood. They heard the beasts shifting in the byre beyond the wall, the soft heavy sound of a cow lying down in straw, the stamp of a hoof, the breath of the ox. They heard, far off across the dark fields, a dog answering another dog, and then a third, the slow nighttime conversation of the dogs passing from farm to farm across the whole sleeping county. They heard the church bell, sometimes ringing the hours of the night for the monks who rose to pray. They heard the watchmen in the towns calling out the hour and that all was well, his voice carrying down the empty street, lonely and reassuring at once. And nearer than any of it, they heard the breathing of the others in the bed beside them, the long, slow breath of the deeply sleeping, rising and falling, the most ordinary and the most comforting sound in all the world. For most people who have ever lived did not sleep alone, and would have thought it a strange cold sorrow to do so. The bed was the great treasure of the household, the single most valuable thing a poor family owned, named carefully in wills, fought over by quarrelling heirs, handed down through the generations like a strip of land or a name. And in a cold cottage the bed was built up against the night, the way a person builds themselves up against a winter they must walk all the way through. A frame of wood, and across it ropes drawn tight and crossed, and the ropes pulled taut again each night with a wooden key, so the bed would not sag, and over the ropes a great sack, a mattress stuffed with whatever the family had, with straw if they had only straw, with the dry rustling husks of beans, or the chaff from the threshing floor, with wool if they were a little better off, with feathers saved over many years if they were better off still, and over the mattress the sheets, coarse and clean and smelling of the herbs they had been laid away with, and over the sheets the blankets, heavy and close woven and dark with use, and over everything a coverlet, and across the foot perhaps the family's spare cloaks thrown down for the extra warmth, and a dog curled heavy somewhere along the edge, and 2, 3, 4 other living bodies packed in close, parents and children, brothers and sisters, the smallest one tucked safest in the middle, all of them breathing together in the dark, all of them pooling their warmth, sharing it, making it between them, because warmth was not a thing you bought or a thing you turned on. Warmth was a thing you made with your own bodies and held jealously through the cold of the night. And because beds were few and people were many, and not one soul in all those long centuries thought it the least bit strange to fall asleep pressed warm against another living person, from the dark of the evening until the grey of the dawn. And here is the first great secret of the old nights, the thing that has been so very nearly forgotten now that it sounds almost like a story when it is told. Those people did not expect to sleep the way that you have been taught to expect to sleep. They did not lie down at 1 hour and rise at another, with nothing at all in between but a single smooth and unbroken river of darkness. No, they expected, instead, that the night would come to them in 2 great gentle waves, with a calm and peaceful island of waking set down quietly in the middle of it, between the 2. They spoke of the first sleep. They spoke of the second sleep, which some called the morning sleep. And between the first sleep and the second there lay an hour, sometimes nearly 2, of soft and natural wakefulness that no one dreaded, no one resented, and no one ever once thought to fight. The first sleep came down soon after the dark came down, while the whole body was still heavy and warm with the labour of the day. And it took them under deep and took them under fast, and held them there in the deep for a few short hours. And then, somewhere in the dead and silent middle of the night, that first tide would quietly withdraw, all on its own, and they would simply drift up out of the depths into a still and shadowed wakefulness, their eyes opening in the black, the whole house silent around them, the whole sleeping world hushed and waiting. And this was the watch, the quiet between the sleeps, and it belonged to them as surely and as rightfully as the daylight belonged to their work in the fields. And in that hushed and shadowed hour between the 2 sleeps, people did the gentlest and most ordinary things, with no hurry in them at all, because there was no hurry to be had. Some simply lay still, and let their minds drift loose and slow across whatever floated by, the way a person lying back in warm and quiet water lets a single leaf drift past upon the surface, without ever once reaching out to catch it. Some reached for the warm body of their husband or their wife beside them in the dark, for the watch was a private hour and an unhurried one, and a very great deal of love was made in the deep silence between the first sleep and the second, more, the old records gently suggest, than at any other time. Some rose softly from the warmth of the bed and crossed the cold floor on bare feet to coax a little life back into the dying fire, kneeling at the hearth and blowing slow and steady upon the grey ash until a small orange eye opened deep within it and a thread of flame stood up. And then they would sit a while beside it and warm their hands and do some small and undemanding thing that asked only the faintest light, stirring a pot of beans left to soften overnight, mending a tear by feel alone, turning the cheeses on their shelf, looking in upon a sleeping child, going out to lay a hand upon a beast that had seemed unwell. Some lit no fire at all, but only lay awake and talked, low and slow, to the one beside them, the kind of soft, unhurried talk that comes only in the dark, when the day's hard edges have all gone soft, telling over old memories, making small quiet plans, saying the gentle things that the bright clamour of the daytime never seems to leave room to say. And many, very many of them spent the watch in prayer, for the church understood this waking hour deeply, and blessed it, and gave it a holy purpose. There were devotions written especially for the soul that woke in the deep heart of the night, and a person might lie there in the warm dark, and let the old familiar words move slowly through them, words worn smooth as river stones by 10,000 repetitions, the very same prayers their mother had murmured over them, and her mother before her, until the words themselves became a soft, dark blanket of their own making, and the second sleep rose quietly up beneath them, and gathered them in, and carried them gently back down into the deep, until the first grey light of morning. And there were those, the holy men and the holy women, in their monasteries and their convents, who did not merely accept the wakeful watch of the night, but went out deliberately to meet it, who rose on purpose in the very deepest and coldest pit of the dark to keep it as a sacred thing, for the monastic night was carved into pieces by prayer, divided and ruled by the great bell, and a monk did not sleep the night through as other men did. He would lie down in the early dark in the long cold dormitory among his sleeping brothers, and he would take his first sleep, and then, hours before any dawn, while the rest of the world lay deep in the trough of its own slumber, the bell would ring out across the silent cloister, and the monks would rise in the black, stiff and heavy with sleep, and pull their habits about them, and file down the cold night stairs in a long quiet line, half dreaming still, into the great dark church lit only by a few small lamps, to sing the night office, to lift up their voices in the deep of the night while all the world around them slept, keeping the watch on behalf of everyone, holding a small light of waking up against the vast dark on behalf of all the sleeping souls who could not keep it for themselves. And then, the office sung, they would file back up the cold stairs and lie down again and take their second sleep until the proper dawn. They understood the broken night not as an affliction, but as a discipline and a gift, a thing offered up, and there is an old wisdom hidden in that, a thing worth carrying down with us, that the wakeful hour need not always be a punishment, that it can be a stillness, an offering, a quiet kept on behalf of the world. But you and I both know, lying here as we are, that there were other nights than these. There were the nights when the first sleep would not come at all. There were the nights when a person lay their head down upon the bolster and closed their tired eyes and waited for that heavy certain tide to rise and pull them gently under, and waited, and the tide simply did not come, and the warm dark that should have meant rest meant only the long slow counting of the hours. And there were the worst nights still, the nights when the first sleep came and went exactly as it ought, but then the watch in the middle stretched itself out longer and longer, with no end anywhere in sight, when the second sleep would not rise no matter how the body begged for it, and a person lay there in the black, with the whole vast remainder of the night spread out ahead of them like a dark country with no far edge, the cold creeping slowly inward, the silence somehow growing louder the longer it was listened to, and no clock anywhere to tell them how much of the dark was already gone, and how much was still to be endured, only the slow heavy certainty that it was a great deal, and that there was nothing whatsoever to be done but to lie there inside it, awake, and wait the long night out, alone, to its distant end. This was the sleeplessness of the old world. This was the wakeful hour as they truly knew it. And to lie awake then was a different and a far heavier thing than even to lie awake now, because there was nothing at all to reach for. There was no book a person could read by that feeble and precious light. There was no gentle murmuring voice that could be summoned out of a small glowing rectangle to talk softly until the eyes grew heavy. There was no light to be turned on without the slow labour of striking a flame, and a flame cost money, and money was scarce, and so the wakeful did not light their few precious candles merely to lie awake by, but lay instead in the unbroken dark, with their own minds, alone together, with all the long hours of the night still to be filled. And the mind, in that dark, does what the mind has always done, in every age, in every land, on every sleepless night, since the very first wakeful soul first lay down beneath the stars. It begins, quietly, to turn. It reaches out and takes up the one small worry you had set carefully aside in the daylight, and it turns it slowly over and over, and the small worry grows large in the dark, the way a single dropped sound grows enormous in an empty stone church. It reaches back across the day, and gathers up all the things you said, and, worse, all the things you wish that you had not said, and lays them out and looks at each one. It reaches forward into the morning that is coming, and arranges every trouble of the day to come into one long grey procession, and walks slowly down the line of it, considering each in turn, the debt that must somehow be paid, the harvest that must come in before the rains arrive to ruin it, the child with the deep and rattling cough, the long hard journey ahead, the quarrel not yet mended, the work not yet finished, the grief, above all the grief, the loss you have somehow managed to keep just ahead of all the long bright day, which finds you out at last the very moment that you lie still and stop running. The people of the past knew this slow churning of the wakeful mind far more intimately than we sometimes care to imagine, and they had their own gentle ways of understanding why it came, and why, on certain nights, the soft tide of sleep would simply not rise up to take them. For they believed, you see, that sleep was a thing the living body itself made, quietly from within, after the day's good food and the day's hard work. The learned physicians, following the ancient Greek teaching that had come slowly down to them across more than 1,000 years, taught that when a person ate their evening meal, warm and gentle vapours rose up from the working stomach toward the head, and that the brain, being by its nature cool and moist, cooled these rising vapours, and gathered them and thickened them, the way the cold lid of a pot gathers the rising steam and turns it into clinging silver drops, and that this gentle, settling, descending heaviness was sleep itself, drifting softly down over all the senses, sealing the eyes, drawing the warm and lively spirits of the body inward and downward, away from the busy surface of things, into the deep still quiet at the very centre of the self. Sleep, to them, was the whole body cooling and turning inward and gathering itself in for the dark. And so, when sleep would not come, they reasoned simply that something somewhere had disturbed this delicate nightly making of it. Perhaps the brain had grown too hot and too dry, scorched by fever or by a hard burning day, and so could no longer cool and thicken the vapours into rest. Perhaps the stomach was overfull, or empty and complaining, or troubled by something ill-digested, and sent its vapours up in a hot and churning disorder, instead of a gentle rising mist. Perhaps there was simply too much of the black bile in the body, that cold and heavy and earthy humour they called melancholy, which darkened the whole mind and crowded out the soft approach of sleep with dread, and with brooding, and with the slow turning of sorrowful thoughts. Perhaps it was grief, which they well understood dried out the body, and burned low in the hollow of the chest, and held the weary eyes propped open against all their longing to close. Perhaps it was love, for everyone in every village knew that love kept the young awake and staring at the rafters half the night. Perhaps it was a troubled conscience, some small unconfessed thing gnawing quietly away beneath the breastbone in the dark. Or perhaps it was only the moon, riding high and round and pale and bright behind the wooden shutters, for they held the moon to have a great and certain pull upon the sleeping mind of man, and many a wakeful soul, then exactly as now, lay there and silently blamed the bright moon for their long unrest, and was perhaps not so very wrong to do it. And against all of this, against the hot dry brain, and the cold dark melancholy, and the churning troubled stomach, and the gnawing aching heart, and the bright unsleeping moon, they had their remedies, patient, homely, hopeful, gentle remedies, gathered carefully over 1,000 years and more of lying awake in the dark, and wanting nothing else in all the wide world but to be allowed, at last, to fall asleep. And some of these old remedies you would know at once, for they are with us yet, unchanged, passed quietly hand to hand down all the centuries between. There was the warm drink taken last thing of all before the bed, the posset, which was milk gently heated over the embers until it steamed and then turned and curdled soft, with a little sour wine or ale, and sweetened with what sweetness the house could spare, and warmed through with a pinch of precious spice, and sipped slow and slow in the dark, settling warm and heavy into the waiting belly, and they swore by it, the old wives and the tired mothers, and you yourself may swear by something very like it still, the warm cup carried up to bed. There was the careful matter of what a person ate at evening, for they firmly believed that certain foods carried drowsiness folded up within them, and the chief of all these sleepy foods, strange as it may sound to you now, was the humble garden lettuce, which the ancients had long taught to be powerfully soporific, so that a dish of lettuce eaten in the evening was thought to draw the drowsiness down over a person. And there is a true thread running through the old belief, for the milky white sap that weeps from the cut stem of the wild lettuce does indeed carry something faintly calming within it, and the herb wives and the cottage gardeners passed this knowledge carefully down the long generations without ever once needing to know the why of it, knowing only that their grandmother had said it was so, and her grandmother before her. For the poor, that was very nearly the whole of it. The warm posset, if there was milk to be spared, the murmured prayer, and the warmed stone. For the warmed stone was the great and faithful comfort of the cold-footed wakeful of every age and every land, a smooth round stone, or a flat brick set near the fire, all through the long evening, until it had drunk in the heat and held it deep within. Then lifted out and wrapped about in an old cloth, and carried quickly to the bed, and laid down at the very feet, where so much of a body's warmth is lost into the cold of the night, and the simple, animal, uncomplicated comfort of warm feet within a cold bed has sent more weary souls gently down into sleep across the long dark centuries of the world than any learned physician's costly draught has ever done. And there was the patient arranging of the body itself, the turning onto the favoured side, the slow drawing up of the knees toward the chest, the pulling of the heavy coverings up close and snug over the bare shoulder, all the small instinctive rituals of settling that every creature that has ever slept upon this earth seems somehow to be born already knowing. And there was, above all else, for those who had little else to reach for in the dark, the prayer, the same worn devotions of the holy watch, the paternoster said over softly under the breath again and again and again. The smooth beads of the rosary slipped one by, patient one, between the fingers in the black. Each single bead a small smooth anchor against the drifting, each quiet repetition wearing the worry a little deeper and a little smoother down, until the slow rhythm of the praying and the slow rhythm of the breathing became at last one single thing, one tide, and the gentle counting of the beads became a kind of counting down toward sleep, and the tired mind, given this one small simple gentle thing to hold, at last let go its tight grip upon all the louder and the heavier things, and loosened and softened and was carried under. And for those who had more, there was, as there is always, a little more. In the great curtained beds of the wealthy, behind the heavy embroidered hangings drawn close all round to hold the warmth in and shut the cold draughts out, and make of the great bed a small, dark, snug room within the larger room. There were soft feather mattresses, light as a held breath, and bolsters stuffed with the finest down, and warmed and spiced and sweetened wine. And there were the physicians and the apothecaries close at hand with their stronger and their costlier arts. There were fragrant oils to be rubbed warm into the temples and the brow, the cool oil of the rose and of the violet, drawing down the heat of the overworked brain. There were small bundles of dried herbs tucked beneath the pillow or hung at the head of the bed, to breathe their soft scent out into the dark all the night long. The gentle chamomile, the feathery dill, whose very oldest name carries folded within it the old meaning to soothe and to lull, and above all the valerian root, with its strange heavy earthy smell, which the herbalists had trusted faithfully against sleeplessness since the far-off days of the ancient Greeks, and which the apothecaries trust quietly and trust well even to this very night, and for pain that would not let a suffering body rest at all, for the deep, wretched, grinding wakefulness of the badly sick and the badly hurt. The physicians reached, with great care and with no small fear, for the powerful sleep-bringing plants that they handled the way one handles fire. The poppy, whose dried tears had been known to bring down a heavy, merciful sleep since the most ancient civilizations the world has ever raised, and the strange forked mandrake of the old dark legends, and the henbane. The careful surgeons of the great medieval hospitals kept a thing they called the sleeping sponge, a sea sponge soaked through with the strong juices of these mighty plants, and then dried hard, to be wetted again and held beneath the nose of a patient who must be cut by the knife, so that the poor soul might sink down softly beneath the very reach of the pain, into a deep and merciful and waiting dark, and rise back up out of it again. If God was kind and all went well, only when the dreadful thing was over and finished and done. These were the heavy and the dangerous artillery of the long old human war against the sleepless night, respected and feared and powerful, the far ancestors of the small white medicines that sit waiting in the cabinet now, and they were never meant for the merely restless, never for a soul lying simply wakeful on an ordinary quiet night. For an ordinary night, even the greatest of the great houses came in the end all the way back round to the very same simple things as the poorest cottage: the warm drink, the warm feet, the low kind word in the dark, the murmured prayer, and the long patient waiting. And so picture it now, one of them, any single one of the countless numberless of them, lying in the dark exactly as you are lying in the dark. The fire has sunk all the way down to soft grey ash. The whole house is fallen deep into its silence. The warm posset has been drunk to the last drop, and the stone has long since cooled at the feet, and the dried herbs breathe faintly out from beneath the pillow, and the last prayer has been said, and still, for a little while yet, sleep holds itself just barely out of reach, hovering very close but not yet quite letting itself fall. And there is nothing left in all the world for them to do, but exactly what there is nothing left in all the world for you to do tonight: to lie still, and to breathe, and to let the dark be kind, and to wait. And the great mercy of it, the one true thing they knew and trusted with their whole tired hearts, the thing that has always been true, and that is just as true for you this very moment, here, now, is that the waiting always, always ends. Without fail, in its own good time, it ends. The slowly turning mind, given nothing new at all to seize and hold on to, grows tired in the end of its own endless turning, and slows and stills. The worries, walked over and over often enough, wear smooth and grow dull and soft, and lose at last their sharp and biting edges. The breath, simply left alone and not interfered with, lengthens of its own quiet accord, and slows of its own quiet accord, with no effort asked, and no permission needed, and nothing at all required of you but to let it. And somewhere down in the very deepest trough of the night, long after the wakeful soul has wholly given up expecting it, The soft, warm tide rises after all, quietly, without any warning, without ever asking leave. And the eyes, which had been open and staring into the black, are open no longer, and the second sleep, the morning sleep, the kind and patient and absolutely certain sleep that always comes in the end to everyone, rises gently up from underneath and gathers the weary soul softly in and carries it down, just as the very first faint thread of pale grey begins, far off, to thin the black at the edge of the shutter, just as the earliest small bird is clearing its throat somewhere out in the cold, down and further down into the warm and the soft and the deep, where there is no more waiting at all, and no more cold, and no more night, and nothing left in all the world to do but rest. And you, dear listener, lying here now in your own quiet dark, with the whole long patient company of the wakeful keeping the watch close beside you across all the silent centuries, all of them who lay just as you lie, and who breathed just as you breathe, and who were carried down, every last one of them, gently in the end, you may let yourself go down that very same way now. There is nothing to reach for, there is nothing at all to fix, and nothing to solve, and nowhere whatsoever that you have to be. There is only your own slow breath, lengthening and softening all on its own, and the gathered warmth of your own bed drawn close around you, and the dark grown soft, and kind and deep, and the old, old certainty, as old as all the sleeping world, that the tide is already rising beneath you even now, in this very moment, and will lift you and hold you and carry you down in its own gentle time, exactly the way it has carried every weary soul that ever lay awake before you, down and softly down into rest. Long before there was ever a physician with his careful Greek learning, long before there was an apothecary with his little drawers and his brass scales and his 1,000 strange-smelling jars, long before anyone had a single name for sleeplessness or a single theory of the cooling brain, there was the cup. There was the simple, ancient, wordless gesture of the warm thing carried up to the lips in the dark, the drink taken last of all before the lying down. And it is older than writing, older than the first walled cities, older very nearly than memory itself, this patient human reaching for some warm thing to swallow that might soften the hard edges of the waking mind and draw the heavy body gently down toward its rest. And so tonight, dear listener, we are going to follow that one cup back through all the long, slow centuries, and across all the wide turning world, from the smoke-blackened cottage hearth to the cool temple, from the monk's quiet infirmary to the curtained beds of the very rich, and we are going to sit a while in the dark beside all the patient sleepless people who, finding that sleep would simply not come to them of its own accord, set about coaxing it instead out of the green and growing things of the earth, out of leaves and roots and pale flowers and small dark seeds, out of milk warmed slow over the embers and honey stirred patiently into wine, out of the whole vast and gently gathered folk wisdom of what to drink, and what to steep, and what to crush, and what to lay beneath the pillow, so that a tired soul might at last let go its grip upon the long day and slip away down into the dark. It begins, perhaps, where so very much of human comfort begins, with milk. For there is hardly a single people anywhere upon the whole face of the earth who did not somewhere, sometime, stumble quietly upon the gentle truth that warm milk, taken slow in the hush before sleep, settles a body the way a soft hand laid upon a fretful child settles it, and they did not know the deep slow reason of it, the hidden quiet chemistry folded within the warm white cup. But they knew the plain fact of it perfectly well, knew that the cup made the eyelids grow heavy and the limbs grow loose, knew that it lay warm and full and round in the belly through the first dark hours, knew that it seemed to wake some old buried memory in the very body itself, the memory of being very small, and being held, and being fed in the dark, and being warm, and being safe, and so the warm cup of milk was carried up the narrow cottage stairs and pressed into cold and waiting hands across 10,000 years and more, sweetened with a little honey, if there was honey to be spared, warmed through with a small precious pinch of spice in the few houses that could afford a small precious pinch of spice, and in the cold wet north it became the posset, the milk gently curdled and thickened with sour ale, or with a little wine, until it parted into soft warm clouds. And in the herding lands it was the milk of the goat, or the cow, or the patient ewe, set close beside the fire in a small black pot, until it just began to steam and tremble at the rim. But everywhere, always, in every land and every century, it was the very same gesture, the same soft animal comfort, the same warm white drink that says, without ever needing a single word, the day is over now, you may put it down, you may rest. And alongside the milk, nearly as old and very nearly as universal, there were the flowers and the leaves steeped into hot water, that long patient tradition of the bedtime infusion that has quietly soothed more wakeful nights across the history of the world than all the physicians who ever lived could ever count between them. First and gentlest of all there was the chamomile, that small modest daisy of the field edge and the trodden roadside and the waste ground by the wall. Its little dried golden flower heads gathered in the warm of summer and saved carefully through the year, and only a few of them dropped into a cup of hot water will turn the whole cup pale and clear and gold and give it the faint sweet smell of apples and of warm cut hay. And the people across the whole broad breadth of Europe and far, far beyond it drank that small gold cup down at evening and felt it loosen, slowly, something that had been held tight and clenched within them all the long day. And the herb wives knew the chamomile as a true and gentle friend, mild enough and safe enough even for the smallest and most fretful child, and it has lost not one grain of its quiet old power in all the long centuries that have passed since, so that the very same small gold cup is being steeped this very night in kitchens all over the sleeping world, for the very same patient reason it was always steeped, to cool down a little ease upon a tired and a wakeful soul. And there was the lavender, whose pale slender purple spikes were gathered and dried, and not so very often drunk as breathed, hung in little tied bunches at the head of the bed, or stripped of their dried flowers and sewn into small soft cloth bags and tucked away beneath the pillow and the bolster, so that the slow steady warmth of the resting head would draw the scent up and out of the dried flowers all the long night through, that clean, cool, sweet, faintly resinous smell that seems somehow to lay a calming hand directly and immediately upon the mind itself. And the great ladies in their tall houses kept lavender folded among their linens, and lavender strewn across the floors of their bedchambers, and the cottage wife grew her own small lavender bush by the door, where her skirts would brush it and release its scent as she passed, and everywhere it was trusted and loved and relied upon to quiet a restless head and ease a person down toward sleep. And there was the lemon balm, that bright green crinkled leaf that smells of lemons and of the whole of summer when it is bruised between the fingers, which the old herbalists wrote down in their great books, made the heavy heart merry, and drove away the dark and brooding thoughts that keep a person lying awake and staring up into the rafters. A leaf for the melancholy and the heart sore and the anxious, steeped into a green and lemony cup against the slow-turning sorrows of the night. And there was the linden, the lime flower, gathered from the great spreading shade trees in their few brief golden weeks of heavy blossom, when the whole tree hums and roars with bees, the small pale flowers dried and saved and steeped into a pale and wonderfully fragrant tea that the people of the warmer south have trusted faithfully against sleeplessness and against frayed and jangling nerves since times that lie far beyond the reach of any written record. A cup of it taken slow on a warm summer evening, breathing up its soft honeyed scent, and the whole hard weight of the day's worries seeming to soften and dissolve away into the steam of it. And there was the dill, whose very oldest name in the old tongues of the cold north carries buried and folded right within it the ancient meaning to soothe and to lull and to put gently to sleep, the mild dill water given for long centuries to wakeful and colicky infants to settle their small aching bellies and quiet their small thin cries in the dark. And there was the hop, the bitter green papery flower of the tall climbing vine, gathered chiefly for the brewing of the ale, but found also, and well known to be found, by all those who laboured long among it in the harvest, to bring on a deep and heavy and inescapable drowsiness, so that the hop pickers themselves grew slow and sleepy and dull-eyed out in the September fields among the towering green vines. And from this plain observation came the old and trusted custom of the pillow stuffed full with dried hops, slipped beneath the head of the wakeful and the restless and the anxious, breathing out its dim green bitter sleepiness into the dark all the night long, a remedy old enough and trusted enough and respected enough that even kings in the depths of their sleepless royal agonies, were brought the pillow of hops to lay their crowned and troubled heads upon, that those heavy heads might at the last grow heavier still, and let them go. And there was the lettuce. For of all the strange and ancient beliefs about the foods that carry sleep quietly folded up within them, none is older, and none is more widespread across the whole of the world than the long faith in the humble garden lettuce, which the most ancient peoples of all held to be powerfully and reliably soporific, a true plant of sleep and of cool green quiet, and they ate it at evening for the sake of the drowsiness they firmly believed it carried down upon them, and they pressed and gathered the milky white sap that weeps slowly from its cut and broken stem, that strange bitter pale latex that beads at the wound, and there is a true and a faithful thread running all the way through this very old belief, for the milky sap of the wild lettuce does indeed carry within itself something faintly calming and faintly numbing and faintly heavy, a real and quiet gift of the plant that the ancients found out by long patient trial over uncounted years and passed carefully down without ever once needing to understand the why of it, knowing only and knowing surely that the lettuce was a friend to sleep, a knowledge already grey and bent with age in the watered gardens of ancient Egypt and the ordered gardens of Rome, and travelling on down the long unbroken centuries from grandmother to granddaughter to her granddaughter after her, all the way at last to the small muddy cottage gardens of the medieval north, the cool green leaf of sleep, the patient old friend of the wakeful, eaten in the failing light of evening for the rest it was trusted to bring. And for those who had a little more, there was the warmth that comes folded inside the sweetness of honey and the slow heat of wine. There was the mead, the old honey wine of the northern and the western peoples, golden and heavy and sweet, brewed from the honey of the summer hives, and a horn or a cup of it, taken by the fire at evening, laid its own warm loosening weight upon a tired body and a clenched mind, and sent many a soul down warm and heavy into the dark. And in the houses of the rich there was the spiced and sweetened wine, the hypocras, red wine warmed gently and stirred through with honey, or with sugar, and with the costly ground spices that came from the far ends of the earth, the cinnamon and the ginger and the grains of paradise, strained clear through a cloth, and carried warm to the great bed as the very last comfort of the evening. A drink for the wealthy and the comfortable, breathing up its rich warm scent, settling heavy and sweet and warming into the belly, easing the great lord and the great lady down into their soft feather beds behind their drawn and heavy curtains. For the warm sweet drink at the very edge of sleep was the privilege and the comfort of every rank, only finer and costlier as one climbed, the spiced wine for the lord, the mead for the freeholder, the warm posset for the goodwife, and for the poorest of all the simple evening ale, but all of them, every one, the same warm cup, lifted in the dark against the same wakeful night. But beyond all the gentle flowers, beyond the kindly white milk and the harmless steeped golden leaf and the warm sweet honeyed cup, there lay another country of remedy altogether, a darker country and a far more dangerous one, where the plants that brought down sleep brought it heavily and brought it deep, and where the thin trembling line between the sleep that they gave and that other longer sleep from which there is no waking at all, was a line that only the very wise and the very fearful ever dared to walk. For there were plants in the old green world whose power over the sleeping mind was vast and terrible, and not to be trifled with. And the people knew them, and knew them well, and feared them rightly, and handled them with the same slow care that a person handles a live red coal carried in a bare hand. First and greatest among them there was the poppy, the great mother of sleep itself, whose round grey-green seed heads weep a milky white tear when their skins are scored with a small knife, and from that dried and gathered tear the most ancient civilizations that the world has ever raised up drew a sleep so deep and so sweet and so complete that the old Sumerians, it is said, wrote the poppy down in their clay as the joy plant, the plant of gladness, and the Egyptians set it among the long rolls of their remedies, and the Greeks crowned the carved heads of their gods of sleep and of dreams and of death alike with its drooping nodding seed heads, for they understood, those clear and unflinching old peoples, that the very same plant which could lull a screaming infant down into silence and ease the last agony of the dying into a soft and merciful calm, could also, with only a very little more, a very little too much, carry a living soul clean past sleep entirely, and out through the far dark door from which none return. And so the poppy stood always, forever, upon the very border between rest and death, beautiful and terrible at once, the deepest and the sweetest sleep that the whole green earth had anywhere to offer, and also the most dangerous, and it was given by the careful and the wise only to the truly and the gravely suffering, the dying, the frantic, the broken, the ones racked past all endurance with pain, and never given lightly, and never ever given to a soul who was merely restless, merely wakeful, for everyone everywhere knew the quiet, dreadful stories of the sleep that had gone down too deep and had simply never lifted again. And there were the others of that dark and guarded company, the henbane, with its sickly pale and clammy flowers veined with purple like the white of a sick man's eye, and its dreadful drowsy stupefying poison, and the mandrake of all the old dark legends, the forked and twisted pale root, shaped uncannily like the body of a small misshapen man, which the ancients steeped into a heavy wine that was given to those poor souls who must be cut open by the surgeon's knife, so that they might sink away beneath the very reach of the screaming pain, a wine so strong and so terribly perilous that to pour out even a little too much of it was to pour out death itself, and which had gathered all around itself across the centuries a thick choking fog of terror and of story, the root that was said to shriek aloud like a damned thing when it was dragged up from the earth, the root that was whispered to grow only beneath the gallows, fed by the dead, the root that no sane and careful soul ever pulled or handled without dread and without charms and without prayer. And the skilled surgeons of the medieval world, who had real and dreadful and necessary work to do in their day, the setting of shattered and splintered bones, the cutting away of dead and rotting flesh, the lancing and the sawing, did sometimes, in their need, mingle these terrible plants together into a single fearsome sleeping draught, a thing of poppy, and of henbane, and of mandrake, and of other dark and deadly herbs, steeped down into strong wine, a draught that could indeed carry a screaming and a struggling patient down into a merciful insensible dark for just long enough that the knife might do its swift and dreadful work, but it was a draught that walked hand in hand with death the whole long way, that could kill quite as readily as it could spare, that the surgeons brewed and measured and gave with their own hearts in their mouths, knowing full well that the very same cup which might save the patient from the unbearable agony of the blade, might just as easily and just as silently never let him wake again at all. And they wrote of it always, every one of them, with grave warning and with open fear, and never, ever as a thing to be trifled with or taken up lightly. For the dose that brought the deep merciful sleep, and the dose that brought the endless one, stood so dreadfully close together, so near as to be scarcely told apart, that no man living could ever be wholly and perfectly sure of the difference between them, and so the strong heavy sleep of the dangerous plants remained always a thing entirely apart, a thing of the sick room and the surgeon's table and the bed of the dying, ringed all about with terror and with prayer and with the gravest care. And it was never, never in all the long centuries the remedy of the ordinary wakeful soul, lying merely restless and merely sleepless upon an ordinary and a quiet night. For that ordinary wakeful soul, lying simply unable to sleep in the warm dark, there was instead the valerian. And the valerian truly deserves its own long place in all this slow telling, for of all the green and growing friends of sleep, it was perhaps the most deeply trusted of them all, and surely the most enduring, the patient unbeautiful root that the herb-wives and the herbalists turned to first and turned to most when a person simply could not find their rest. A homely, modest, almost ugly plant with small clustered pale pink-white flowers upon a tall stem, and a thick pale tangled root that carries, once it is dug and dried, a strange and a heavy and a frankly not altogether pleasant, earthy, musky, ancient smell, a smell that cats, strangely, love beyond all sense and all reason, and that draws them rolling and writhing and purring in a kind of helpless ecstasy, and a smell that the old herb-wives knew at once, the moment it reached them, as simply the smell of sleep itself. They dug the pale roots in the cool of the autumn, when the plant's strength had gone down into the earth, and they cleaned them and dried them and kept them carefully through the year, and they steeped them down for the wakeful and the anxious and the heart-sore and the trembling, and they had done so, and trusted it so, since the far-off bright days of the old Greek physicians, who had written of it under an older name, a name that meant simply that it was good, that it was well, that it had power, and the long unbroken trust in it ran on and on down all the centuries that followed, through the walled monastery garden and the muddy cottage plot and the apothecary's high dim shelf, so that the valerian was steeped against sleeplessness in the time of the Greeks, and steeped against it through all the long dark middle centuries, and steeped against it again in the powdered and the bewigged years that came after, and it is gathered into small dark glass bottles and pressed into small white tablets and steeped against it yet, this very night, in the houses of the sleepless everywhere across the world, the very same patient root, the very same heavy old earthy smell, the very same long quiet faithful promise of rest at the end of a wakeful night. And all of this slow gathered green knowledge, the gentle and the dangerous alike, was held and kept safe, and copied and carried forward, and passed down hand to hand and pen to pen across the long centuries by certain faithful keepers, and chief among all those keepers, through the long dark Middle Ages of the world, were the quiet monks and the quiet nuns in their walled and ordered houses, who kept the great physic gardens where every useful and every healing plant grew in its own neat and tended bed, the chamomile and the lavender and the valerian and the carefully guarded poppy, each in its own appointed place, watered and weeded and gathered in its season, and who kept also the infirmary, the long quiet room of beds, where the sick of their own house, and very often the sick of the whole poor countryside round about, were tended and dosed and watched over, and who copied out, by the small and patient light of their candles, in the long cold hours, the old herbals, the great and precious books of all the plants, where each leaf and stem and flower and root was drawn and painted and named in careful ink, and all its powers and its dangers and its proper uses set faithfully down, the books that had come slowly down to them out of the bright ancient world, and were copied and copied again and added to and corrected, generation patiently upon generation, so that the whole slow gathered human wisdom of how to coax sleep gently out of the green earth was never once lost in all those dark centuries, but was carried always forward upon the patient pens of men and women who themselves rose in the very deepest pit of the night to pray, and who therefore knew, perhaps better and more intimately than anyone else alive, the long, cold, wakeful watches of the dark. And out beyond the walls, in the towns and the cities, there stood the apothecary, in his shop of 1,000 mingled strange and pungent smells, his walls lined with little wooden drawers, and his shelves crowded with jars of glass and jars of glaze. His rafters hung thick with drying bundled herbs, his brass scales and his heavy mortar and his worn stone pestle always ready to his hand, and he would weigh out for a small coin a little of the valerian, or a little of the chamomile, or, with the proper written word from a physician and a very great and careful show of solemnity, a small and measured portion of the dangerous things, and he stood, that apothecary, as the keeper and the dispenser of all this rooty, fragrant green knowledge for the ordinary townsfolk who had no garden and no learning of their own. The one a sleepless and a desperate soul might go to in the plain light of day, and say to, simply and quietly, I cannot sleep, I have not slept, and be sent home again with some small fragrant folded paper packet and some low and kindly word of hope to carry into the next dark night. And for the very poorest of all, for those who had no coin at all to spare for the apothecary, and no garden plot of their own, and no milk to turn into a posset, there was still always the oldest and the simplest sleep drink of every one of them, which was the ale. For the small beer, the thin, weak daily ale that nearly everyone drank in all the lands where the standing water could not be safely trusted, carried within it its own gentle loosening weight, and the cup, or the 2 cups of it, taken slow at evening by a weary labourer, warmed his cold body and loosened his tight mind, and laid its own soft forgetful hand upon the long day's hard and grinding cares, and the tired man or woman who could afford absolutely nothing else in all the world could still, with their plain evening ale, draw down upon themselves a little of that loosening warmth and that blurring ease. And so many and many a weary soul across all the long centuries found, in the simple humble cup of evening ale, the only help towards sleep that they would ever in their whole hard lives come to know, the poor man's posset, the poor man's draught, the poor man's small mercy, and it sent them, heavy and warm and dim, down at last into the dark of their crowded and shared and rope-strung beds. And there was, woven all through this, one more quiet comfort that is easy to overlook, and that was the slow patient ritual of the gathering and the drying and the steeping itself, the doing of the thing, which soothed the soul quite as surely as the drink it made. For there was a deep and a settling peace in the summer gathering of the small flowers in the warm field with the bees about, and a peace in the tying of the bunches and the hanging of them up to dry from the kitchen rafters where they swung and slowly faded and filled the whole room with their mingled drowsy scent through all the months after, and a peace in the autumn digging of the pale roots from the cooling earth, and a peace, above all, in the quiet evening preparing of the cup itself, the setting of the small black pot upon the embers, the careful measuring of the dried gold flowers into the hot water, the slow watching of the steam begin to rise and curl, the patient waiting for it to steep and cool just enough to drink, the wrapping of the warm hands around the warm cup, for all of this, all the slow, small, unhurried doing of it, was itself a putting down of the day, a turning of the mind away from its sharp troubles and toward a soft and simple and undemanding task, a long gentle ritual of ending that prepared the soul for sleep quite as much as ever the chamomile or the valerian within the cup prepared the body for it, the doing and the drinking together, hand in hand, easing the wakeful down. And so you see now, dear listener, how it all ran, this long, long human reaching for sleep out of the green and the growing earth, from the warm white cup of milk to the small gold cup of chamomile, from the lavender breathing soft beneath the pillow to the heavy earthy root of the valerian steeped down against the dark, from the cool green sleepy leaf of the old lettuce to the dreadful guarded border power of the poppy kept only ever for the dying, from the spiced warm wine of the great curtained bed to the poor man's plain and humble cup of evening ale, the whole vast patient tradition of it, gathered slow across more than 10,000 wakeful nights of the world, written down on brittle papyrus and on cured parchment, dug up from cold autumn gardens, hung drying from the smoke-dark rafters of 100,000 kitchens, measured out by candlelight, carried up 1,000 narrow cottage stairs in the dark by tired and hopeful hands. And the most remarkable thing in all of it, the one true thing worth holding gently in your mind as you lie here now in your own quiet dark, is how very little it has truly changed across all those long and turning years. How the warm cup that is carried up to a bed somewhere tonight is the very same gesture, exactly as the warm cup that was carried up to a bed 3,000 and 4,000 years ago. How the chamomile and the valerian and the lavender that the sleepless reach for in this very age are the very same plants, unchanged, that the ancients reached for in theirs. How the whole long human story of coaxing rest gently out of leaf and root and flower and seed is one single, unbroken, patient thread, running all the way from the very first wakeful soul who ever pressed a sleepy bitter leaf between their fingers in the dark, down through all the numberless centuries, down through every cottage and every temple and every monastery and every great curtained bed, all the way down to this very night, and to your own warm cup if you have one cooling there beside you, and to your own tired and your own waiting hands. So if there is a cup near you now, let it warm you, and if there is not, then let only the gentle thought of it warm you all the same, the thought of all the countless patient hands that ever lifted such a cup in the dark before you, the milk and the honey and the small gold flowers and the heavy old root, the whole long quiet company of the wakeful who found, in the end, that the green earth had a kindness folded up within it for the sleepless after all. Let your hands grow heavy now where they lie. Let your breath grow slow and deep and even of its own accord, with nothing asked of you. Let the warmth move slowly down through your body, the way the warm cup moves down, settling and easing and softening and loosening, until the long day lets go its last tight grip upon you, and the dark grows kind and deep and close around you, and sleep itself, the oldest and the truest gift of all, the one that no leaf and no root ever truly made, but only ever gently and patiently called, rises up at last beneath you of its own slow and certain accord, and gathers you softly in, and carries you down, warm and heavy, and held and safe, the way it has carried every weary wakeful soul that ever lived before you, down and down and gently down into rest. Orchestrated longest sleep story with protective folklore themes. Long after the cup has been drunk, and the warm stone has cooled at the feet, and the prayers of the watch have risen and fallen in the dark, there remained one last thing that the sleepless of the old world did before they would let themselves go down into the night, and that was the careful ringing round of the bed itself, the quiet laying of protections all about the place of sleep, the slow and patient sealing of the small dark room of the bed against everything that the night was believed to carry, against the cold and the dark and the wandering things and the bad dreams and the long wakefulness itself. And tonight, dear listener, as you lie there in your own gathered dark, we are going to go all the way around the world and all the way down the centuries, and sit with all the people who ever ringed their beds with charms and with customs and with small worn objects of comfort. And we are going to find, in the patient laying out of all those quiet protections, the very oldest and the very gentlest secret of falling asleep, which is the simple, deep animal knowledge that you are safe now, that the day is sealed away behind you, and that you may, at the last, let go. For the bed, you must understand, was never to those old sleepers merely a place to lie. It was a small fortress raised each night against the dark, a warm and curtained island of the known set, down in the middle of a great black sea of the unknown, and the crossing from waking into sleep was understood by nearly every people who ever lived as a true threshold, a real and a perilous edge, a doorway through which the soul passed each night out of the safe-lit world of the day and down into something deep and strange and not entirely under any person's control, and so it seemed only right, only wise, only natural to stand a few quiet guardians at that doorway, to lay down a few small protections at the edge of the crossing, the way a traveller about to set out upon a dark road might say a prayer and touch a charm and look once over the shoulder before stepping off into the night. And these protections were made, almost everywhere, of the simplest and the homeliest things, the things that lay ready to every hand, a knife, a stone, a shoe, a sprig of green, a few scattered grains, a whispered word, and yet in the laying of them the anxious wakeful soul found a comfort far larger than the small things themselves could ever hold. For what was truly being laid down, night after night, in cottage and in castle and in every land beneath the moon, was not iron and not salt and not stone at all, but order and ritual and the deep settling certainty that all that could be done had now been done, and that there was nothing left to do but rest. First, almost everywhere across the cold north there was the iron, for iron was held by a belief so old and so widespread that no one could say where it had begun, to be a thing the creatures of the dark could not abide, a hard, bright, cold metal of the daylight world that the soft things of the shadow shrank away from, and so the wakeful laid iron about the bed against the night. A knife might be set point outward upon the window-sill, or slipped beneath the bolster where a hand could feel its cool flat blade in the dark. A pair of open scissors might be laid upon the coverlet, or hidden beneath the pillow, their crossed blades doing double work, for they were both iron and a cross at once. A horseshoe, that great lucky curve of worn iron, might be nailed above the door, or above the bed, hung with its open mouth turned up, so that the good fortune would gather and pull within it, and not run out, and the cold nails themselves, hammered into the bedpost or the lintel, were thought to pin the dark fast and hold it out. And there was the hold stone, the hagstone, the small grey stone that the water had worn a natural hole clean through, prized above almost all other charms, threaded onto a cord and hung at the head of the bed, or tied to the great iron key, for a stone that the patient water had pierced was a stone with a window in it, a stone you could look through into the other world and see the things that hid there, and a stone that the night things therefore could not pass. And many a wakeful soul lay quieter for the small grey weight of it hanging there in the dark above their head, the little stone with the eye worn through it, keeping its silent watch. And there was salt, the bright clean savour of the earth and the sea, scattered in a thin line across the threshold of the door, or upon the sill of the window, for salt was purity itself. Salt was the thing that kept and preserved, and would not let corruption in, and a line of it laid down across the way was a line the unclean things of the night were believed unable to step across, so that the sleeper within lay sealed inside a ring of brightness. And in the houses of the faithful there was, beneath the pillow, or upon the small table by the bed, the holy book, the worn family Bible, or the little book of hours, or the printed prayer, laid open or laid closed against the dark, its mere presence a comfort and a guard. And there was the rosary kept wound about the bedpost, or held loosely in the sleeping hand, and the small worn medal, or the cross worn always at the throat, and clasped in the fingers as the eyes began to close, and the sprig of blessed greenery tucked behind the crucifix on the wall, the rowan branch that the old country people trusted above all trees against the things of the dark, the rue, the vervain, the bunch of dried herbs hung at the head of the bed, that was both medicine for the body and shield for the soul, breathing its scent and its protection together out into the night. Then there was the strange and tender business of the shoes, a custom so old and so oddly particular that it turns up, in one shape or another, in country after country across the whole of the world. For the shoes, set down at the bedside at the end of the day, were arranged with care, and never carelessly, and the way of arranging them was held to matter very much. In many places the shoes were set with the toes pointing away from the bed, turned to face the door, so that whatever might come creeping in the dark would find them aimed outward, and read in them a leaving rather than a coming, or so that the sleeper's own feet in the morning would be pointed already toward the day, and the rising and the going out, and would not be turned back toward the dark. And in many places one shoe was set the opposite way to the other, crossed and contrary, the toe of one pointing in, and the toe of the other pointing out. And this small deliberate disorder, this crossing of the shoes, was believed to puzzle and to confound and to turn back the nightmare, the heavy creeping thing of the dark that was thought to come and sit upon the chest of the sleeping, and to press the breath from them, and to fill their sleep with weight and dread. For that creature, it was said, was a thing of fixed and rigid habit, a thing that could not abide a thing out of its order, and finding the shoes set crooked and crossed and wrong it would stop, and be turned aside, and trouble that bed no more. And this brings us to the strangest and the most wonderful of all the old night charms, the charm of counting, which rested upon a belief found scattered all across the world, from the cold cottages of the north to the warm villages of the far south, that the troubling things of the dark, the mare and her many cousins, the small malicious spirits, and the restless wandering dead, suffered all of them under one same curious compulsion, that they could not, however much they wished to, pass by a heap of small scattered things without stopping to count every single one. And so the wakeful laid out for them deliberate snares of counting. A handful of mustard seed, the smallest seed there is, might be scattered upon the threshold, or strewn across the floor about the bed, so that any creature creeping in must halt, and must count, one seed and then another, on through the long dark, and the seeds being so very many and so very small the creature would still be counting them, hunched and absorbed and helpless, when the first grey light of the dawn came up at last to drive it away unfulfilled. A sieve might be hung at the door, or a net cast over the bed, or the great fishing net hung up upon the wall. For every hole in the sieve and every knot in the net was a thing the counting spirit must reckon and tally, and a net has so many knots, and a sieve so many holes, that the dawn would always come before the count was done. A broom might be set bristles upward across the doorway, every separate straw a thing to be numbered. And so the sleeper lay down inside a quiet fortress, not of walls but of arithmetic, ringed about by more small things than any creature of the dark could ever finish counting before the morning, and slept, soft and safe, behind a wall made all of seeds and knots and straws, while out in the dark the patient hopeless counting went on and came to nothing. And is it any wonder, dear listener, that the oldest and the surest folk remedy for the wakeful mind itself, the trick that has been whispered from grandmother to child across uncounted generations, is simply to count, to lay out before your own restless mind a long line of small identical things, and to number them slowly, one by one, until the counting itself wears the wakefulness smooth, and the mind, like the spirit at the threshold, grows so absorbed and so dull in its patient tallying that it forgets at last to be afraid, and forgets to turn over its troubles, and slips mid-number down into sleep. And there was, in the old tales of the night things, one more charm of a stranger, and a bolder kind, which was the seizing of the creature's own power against it. For some of these beings of the dark, the people said, the heavy mare and her kind, carried about with them some small object that held all their strength, a little hat, a cap, a cloak of darkness, and whoever, waking suddenly in the grip of the thing, could reach out in the dark and snatch that small object from it, would hold the creature bound and helpless and at their mercy, so that it must do their bidding and trouble them no more. And there were old stories told by the fire of cunning sleepers who had done just this, who had woken to the weight upon their chest, and reached up quick, and grasped the little cap, and so caught and tamed the very terror of their night. But this was the boldness of the old tales, the dream of mastery. For most ordinary wakeful souls, the charm was gentler and quieter than that. Not the seizing of the dark, but only the patient warding of it. The iron and the salt and the stone and the scattered seed, the small protections laid down soft against the night. And over all of these protections, over the iron and the salt and the holed stone and the crossed shoes and the scattered counting seed, there lay the oldest and the most universal guardian of sleep of all, which was the human voice, lifted gently in the dark, the song and the word sung over the one about to sleep. For there is no people anywhere upon the earth, in any age, in any land, however far apart and however unknown to one another, who did not invent, each entirely on their own, the lullaby, the slow, soft, circling song sung low over the cradle and the bed, to carry the wakeful down into sleep, and the lullabies of all the world, for all their different words and their different tunes, are somehow all the same song, all of them slow, all of them low, all of them built upon a few gentle notes, circling round and round and round, rising and falling like the rocking of the cradle, like the breathing of the sleeper, like the long slow swell of a quiet sea, and all of them carrying, beneath whatever the words may happen to say, the one same wordless message that the warm cup carries, and the warm stone carries, and the watchman's cry carries, the message that says, you are safe, and you are held, and you are not alone, and you may let go now, and sleep. And alongside the song there was the prayer said over the sleeper, the old bedtime blessing murmured at the very edge of the dark. And one of the oldest and the most beloved of all these, across the whole of the Christian world, was the gentle charm that set a guardian at each of the four corners of the bed, a watcher posted at the head, and a watcher at the foot, and a watcher at either side, 4 bright keepers standing through the night around the sleeper, as around a small holy ground, so that the bed itself became a guarded and a blessed place, ringed by quiet shining sentinels, and the child or the grown soul who lay down within that ring of 4 watchers lay down already comforted, already kept, already safe in the strong gentle care of the corners, and went down into the dark unafraid. And far away across the great cold ocean, among the peoples of the woodlands of another world entirely, who had never heard of iron charms or hold stones or any of the customs of the old European night, there grew up out of the very same deep human need a charm of its own, and one of the most beautiful that any people ever made against the troubles of sleep, the woven web of the dream-catcher, the small round hoop strung across with a fine net like a spider's web, and hung above the place where a child slept, so that in the night, as the dreams came drifting down upon the sleeper, as dreams do, the good dreams, the kind and the gentle ones, would find their way easily through the open heart of the web, and slip down softly to the sleeping child below, while the bad dreams, the dark and the troubling ones, would be caught and tangled and held fast in the fine strands of the net, snared there through the night, unable to reach the sleeper. And then, with the first touch of the morning sun upon the web, those caught bad dreams would simply melt away and be gone, burned off and dissolved by the light of the new day, so that the child woke clean and easy, with only the good dreams remaining. And is that not, dear listener, the very same hope, exactly, the very same tender wish, as the line of salt across the threshold, and the net of knots upon the wall, and the 4 bright watchers at the corners of the bed, the one same deep human longing, dreamed up over and over by people who never met, and never could have met, the longing to lie down in the dark and be kept, to have the good let in and the bad held off, to sleep beneath some small woven shield against the night, and to wake whole in the morning, the longing that is older than every people and common to them all. And here, at the very last, is the deep quiet truth that lies beneath every one of these charms, the secret that the iron and the salt and the seeds and the songs and the woven webs all share, the thing worth carrying down with you now into your own dark, which is that the true magic of all of them was never in the things themselves at all, but in the doing of them, in the ritual, in the slow nightly laying out of the protections one by one. For when a person, at the close of the day, set the knife upon the sill, and scattered the seed at the door, and turned the shoes just so, and hung the small stone at the bedhead, and said the old blessing over the four corners, and sang the low circling song, what that person was truly doing, beneath all the old beliefs, was performing a slow and a soothing and an unvarying sequence of small calming acts. The same acts in the same order every single night, a quiet ritual that told the anxious body, more surely than any words, that the day was over now and sealed away, that everything that needed doing had been done, that the bed was made safe and the dark was warded, and there was no more, nothing more at all, to think about or to guard against or to fear. And the mind, hearing this in the only language the deep body truly understands, the language of repeated soothing ritual, at last unclenched, and let the worries go, and gave the body leave to sink, for the charm was real after all. Only it worked not upon the dark outside, but upon the wakefulness within, and the deepest old name for it, if it had a name, was simply peace, the peace of a thing completed, the peace of all defences quietly in place, the peace that lets the guarding mind lay down its long vigil and rest. So let all of them gather close around your own bed now, dear listener, all the quiet guardians of all the sleepless of all the centuries, let them ring you round where you lie. Let the warm cup of long ago be cooling at your side, and the warm stone be at your feet, and the small grey-holed stone hang, watching above your head. Let the bright line of salt lie across your threshold, and the net of 1,000 patient knots hang upon your wall. More knots by far than any trouble of the night could ever finish counting before the dawn. Let the iron keep its cold bright watch, and the 4 shining keepers stand quiet at the 4 corners of your bed, one at your head, and one at your feet, and one at either hand, steady through all the dark. Let the low circling song of all the mothers who ever sang move slowly through you, and the slow web above you catch and hold and melt away by morning every dream that is not kind. And let the whole long company come and stand about you too, the ones we have kept watch with all this night, the monks singing low in their cold far churches, the watchman walking his round and calling that all is well, the shepherd on his hill, and the mother at her cradle, and the baker at his glowing oven, all of them awake and holding their small lights up against the dark, on your behalf, so that you, here, now, in your own warm bed, in your own gathered dark, are guarded, and are kept, and are held, and are not now, and have never been alone. There is nothing left for you to do. Every protection is in place, every charm is laid, every watcher stands at the corners. The day is sealed away behind you, and the night is warded all around you, and there is nothing whatsoever left to think about, and nothing left to fear, and nowhere at all that you must be, and nothing at all that you must do, but lie still, and breathe, and let yourself go down. So let your breath grow slow now, and let it grow deep of its own accord, with nothing asked of you. Let the weight settle gently into your shoulders, and into your arms where they lie, and into your heavy resting legs, and let the warmth gather close and soft around you. Let the charms keep their quiet watch, and the singers sing, and the 4 bright keepers stand. Let the counting go on out there in the dark, the long, patient, hopeless counting that will not be finished before the morning. And let it carry your own slow drifting mind down with it, one soft number, and then another, until the numbers blur and soften and dissolve. And let the deep tide, the oldest tide of all, the one that no charm ever truly made and no charm was ever truly needed for, the kind and certain tide that rises in the end beneath every guarded sleeper and every wakeful soul that ever lay down in the long history of the dark, let it rise now beneath you, quietly, without your asking, without your trying, and gather you softly in, and lift you, and hold you, and carry you down, past the warded threshold, and the singing dark, and the watching corners of your safe and guarded bed, down, and gently down, where there is no more counting, and no more guarding, and no more night, and no more anything at all to keep, but only the warm and the deep and the boundless quiet, only rest, only sleep, only the long sweet falling into the dark that has been waiting for you, patiently, kindly, all this while, to gather you home. And before the charms were laid, before the iron was set upon the sill, and the seed was scattered at the door, there were the gentler rituals of the body itself, the slow tending of the tired flesh that prepared it, night after night, for its sinking into sleep. And chief among these, across cottage and castle and the warm houses of the south alike, was the washing of the feet. For the feet had carried the whole weight of the day across the cold floors and the muddy lanes and the long hard miles, and to bathe them at evening in a basin of warm water, to sit upon the edge of the bed in the failing light, and lower the aching feet into the warmth, and feel the heat climb slowly up through them, and loosen everything that the day had clenched, was one of the oldest comforts there is, a thing the weary have done since the very first basin was ever filled, and the warmth drawn down into the feet drew the blood down with it, away from the busy head, down toward the deep quiet of the body, so that the head grew light and cool and empty, and the body grew heavy and warm, which is, though they did not know the why of it, the very shape of sleep beginning. And the rich had their warming pans, the long-handled covered pans, filled with glowing embers from the hearth, and passed slowly back and forth between the cold sheets to drive out the damp and the chill before the body was let in, so that the great curtained bed was warmed and waiting like a held breath, and the poor had only the heated stone wrapped in its cloth. But the wish behind both was the same, the wish to climb down not into cold but into warmth, into a bed already gentled and made kind. And there was the slow combing of the hair, the long unhurried brushing out of it before the lying down, stroke after patient stroke, and in many houses the strokes were counted, 100 slow strokes drawn down through the hair by lamplight, and the counting and the rhythm of it, and the soft repeated pull of the comb, were themselves a settling, a quieting, the kind of slow, even repeated motion that loosens the mind the way it loosens the hair. And many a woman sat at the edge of the bed, and combed in the dark gold light, until her own eyes grew heavy with the rhythm of her own hands, the brushing out of the day, the smoothing down of the night. And there was, oldest of all the body's sleep rituals, the rocking, the slow sway, for every cradle that was ever built was built to rock. And every mother in every land learned without being taught that the small wakeful one would go down soonest if it were swayed, gently, steadily, back and forth, the way the body had been swayed before it was ever born in the warm dark, by the walking of the mother. And this swaying was not only for the very small, for the grown were rocked too, in the hammocks slung between the trees and the posts in the warm countries, in the swinging cots upon the heaving ships at sea, in the gentle endless motion that quiets a body more surely than any drug. And even the wakeful soul, lying still in a still bed, will often, all on its own, begin to rock a little, to sway some part of itself, a foot, a hand, the head upon the pillow, reaching back without knowing it for that first oldest comfort of all, the rocking, the sway, the motion of being carried. And there was sound, the soft repeated sound that the wakeful have always reached for to fill and to gentle the great silence of the night, the sound we now give a cold new name to, but which is older by far than any name. The rain drumming soft and steady upon the thatch above, the long slow breathing of the sea upon a near shore, the wind moving in the trees, the low hum and whir of the spinning wheel turning late by the fire, the slow rhythmic creak and groan of the great mill grinding through the dark, the murmur of a low voice talking on and on of nothing in particular, and all of these the wakeful learned to lean upon, for a steady unchanging sound lays a kind of soft floor beneath the listening mind, and gives it something even and unbroken to rest upon, so that it stops its anxious straining after every small noise in the dark, and simply floats, held up upon the steady sound, the way a body is held up upon still water, and drifts and sinks. But the deepest trouble of the wakeful, then as now, was never truly the dark outside, nor the cold, nor the silence, but the turning of the mind within, the worries that rise the moment the body lies still. And against this oldest enemy the people of the world made the gentlest charms of all, the charms for the setting down of care. Far across the world, in the high villages of the Guatemalan mountains, the people made tiny dolls, the worry dolls, small as a fingernail, dressed in scraps of bright thread, and the custom was this, that a wakeful child or a wakeful grown soul would take the little dolls one by one in the dark, and tell to each one a single worry, this doll the worry of the morning's work, this one the worry of the debt, this one the small sharp worry of the unkind word, until every worry that gnawed had been spoken aloud and handed over into the keeping of a little doll, and then the dolls were placed beneath the pillow, and there they kept the worries through the night, holding them, carrying them, so that the sleeper need not, and the mind, emptied of its load, having given each trouble away into small waiting hands, grew light and quiet, and able at last to let go. And in other lands there was the worry stone, the smooth flat stone carried in the pocket, and rubbed by the thumb in its small worn hollow, taking the anxiousness out through the fingers. And there was the long human habit of the bedtime emptying of the mind, the examination of the day made each night before sleep, the quiet telling over of what had passed, and the laying of it down, the confession, the prayer that hands the whole troubled day and the whole troubled self up into a larger keeping, with the old words that say, "Into thy hands, take this, hold this, I lay it down, I need not carry it through the night." And the soul that has truly laid its burden down, by whatever name and in whatever fashion, sleeps as the soul that still grips its burden never can. And there were the quiet ones who shared the house, the unseen keepers, who had to be kept content if the family was to sleep in peace, for many peoples believed that every house held its own small spirit, its guardian, dwelling in the warm dark behind the stove, or beneath the hearth, or under the threshold, the domovoi of the Slavic cottages, who lived behind the great warm oven, and watched over the household and its beasts, the brownie and the hob of the northern farms, who would keep the house quiet and prosperous if he were treated well. And the custom was to leave them a little something at the day's end, a small bowl of milk set by the hearth, a crust of bread, a handful of porridge, an offering left out in the dark, so that the keeper of the house would be pleased and would settle, and would not knock and rattle and trouble the family in the night, but would keep his quiet watch and let them sleep. And there is in this, too, the same deep wish, the wish to be on good terms with the dark of one's own house, to have made peace with the night before lying down in it, to know that the keeper is fed and content, and that the house is at rest with itself, so that the family may be at rest within it. There is an hour in the deep of the night that most of the sleeping world will never once see. An hour folded away in the very middle of the dark that belongs only to those who, for one reason or for another, do not lie themselves down and surrender to the night like everyone else around them, but who instead rise up into it, or who stay standing awake within it, and who keep the watch while all the rest of the world lies breathing slow and deep and unknowing in its beds. And tonight, dear listener, as you lie there in your own warm and patient dark, we are going to go quietly out and keep company with them, with the watchers of the night, with all the men and all the women across all the long centuries of the world who held the deepest and the loneliest hours awake on behalf of everyone else, the monks who rose in the cold pit of the dark to pray, the watchmen who walked the silent black streets and called the slow hours, the shepherds upon their lonely hills, and the sailors out upon the black water, and the bakers at their glowing ovens, and the mothers bent low over the cradle, and the patient keepers of the dying flame, all of them awake in the great surrounding stillness, while the whole world slept around them. And we are going to find, somewhere in the patient steady rhythm of their long quiet vigils, something that may carry you down at last into your own rest. For there is a strange and a very old comfort in the simple thought of being watched over, in the deep and the ancient knowledge that even now, even tonight, even here in your own dark, someone somewhere is awake and is keeping the watch. Begin with the monks, for they were the great masters of the wakeful night, the ones who took the broken and the scattered sleeping hours that fall upon the rest of us as an affliction and an unwelcome burden, and turned them instead, deliberately and willingly and even gladly, into the very heart and centre of their whole lives. In the great grey stone monasteries that stood scattered across the whole face of the medieval world, set upon their green hills and down in their quiet river valleys and out upon their lonely wind-swept islands, far from any other living soul, the day and the night together were not one long and undivided and shapeless stretch, the way they are for most of us, but were instead a thing carefully and lovingly carved up into pieces, divided and ordered and ruled and shaped entirely by prayer. And the great bell was the clock of all of it, the iron bell that hung up in the dark of the tower, and rang out across the cloister and the gardens and the sleeping fields, and called the brothers from whatever they were doing, from the field and from the kitchen and from the scriptorium, and, in the very dead of the night, from their narrow beds, to come and to gather, and to sing the office, to come and lift their joined voices together at the appointed and the unchanging hour. For the monks did not sleep the night through in one long unbroken peace, the way a tired farmer or a weary merchant slept. They lay themselves down in the early dark, soon after the last grey light had failed in the west, in the long cold dormitory where all the brothers slept together in their plain narrow beds beneath the high black vault of the roof. And they took there their first sleep, the heavy and the welcome first sleep that comes down hard and fast and total upon a body that has been worn thin by labour and by fasting and by the long discipline of the day. And they sank gratefully into it, and they slept. And then, hours later, long before there was the faintest hint or the thinnest grey thread of any dawn, in the very coldest and the very darkest and the most utterly silent hour of the whole slow-turning night, the hour when the rest of the sleeping world lay deepest down at the very bottom of its slumber, the great bell up in the tower would begin to ring, slow and deep and patient and insistent, tolling out across the frozen black, and the brothers would wake, every last one of them, stiff and heavy and reluctant and dazed and thick with the warm sleep that still clung close about them, and they would rise up from their warm beds into the bitter biting cold of the stone room, and pull their rough heavy woolen habits about their shoulders, and draw up their deep hoods against the chill that found the back of the neck, and slip their bare cold feet into their cold sandals, and file out, one behind another, in a long quiet shuffling line. half dreaming still, their eyes barely open, down the worn and hollowed night stairs that had been built to lead directly down from the dormitory into the church itself, so that the brothers need never go out into the open, killing cold of the cloister, to reach it. Down and down into the great dark nave that was lit only by a few small guttering lamps and a single thick candle or two upon the altar, their breath rising up in pale ghostly clouds upon the freezing air before their faces. And there, in the deepest and the most forsaken dead of the night, while every farmer and every merchant and every soldier and every king for miles and miles around them all lay fast and heedlessly asleep, the brothers would open their mouths and lift up their voices and begin to sing. They called this great prayer of the deep night by different names in different lands and in different houses and at different hours of the dark, this longest and this most solemn and this most demanding of all the many prayers of the whole turning day, and it ran on for a long, long while there in the cold and the dark, the slow and the unhurried chanting of the psalms passing back and forth, from one side of the carved wooden choir across to the other and back again, the low, steady, patient rise and fall of the ancient plain chant, the old and worn and familiar Latin words that the brothers knew so deeply and so completely, having sung them every single night for so many long years, that they could sing them with their eyes half closed, and their tired minds still soft and drifting and dim at the very edges of sleep, the words rising up of their own accord from somewhere far below thought, and the great pure sound of it all filling the whole cold echoing stone church, and rising up and up into the unseen dark vaults far overhead, a single steady unbroken human sound held up patiently and stubbornly against the vast and the total surrounding silence of the sleeping night. And they did not do this, you must understand, for themselves alone, and not even for their own house alone. They understood their long, cold, lonely vigil in the dark as a thing offered up, a gift laid down, a watch kept faithfully on behalf of all the wide world that slept, a small and steady and stubborn light of waking prayer held up against the enormous pressing dark on behalf of every single soul that could not keep such a watch for itself. The farmer and his wife and his children asleep in their cottage, the merchant snoring in the town, the king lying guarded in his great bed, the sick and the dying, and the newly grieving and the desperate, all of them carried, in a real and a felt sense, upon the patient bowed shoulders of the brothers' prayer, carried gently through the most dangerous and the most defenceless hours of the whole dark night. For there was an old and a very deep belief, woven all through those centuries, that the night was the time when the powers of the dark pressed in closest and hardest against the thin walls of the sleeping world. And so the steady prayer of the monks in the deepest hour was understood as a kind of standing in the breach, a holding of the line, a keeping of the watch upon the high cold spiritual walls, while everyone else lay sleeping and trusting and defenceless down below. And there is something in that, dear listener, something well worth carrying down with you into your own dark tonight, the old and the steadying idea that the wakeful hour is not, after all, only a curse and an affliction, but can be instead a duty and an offering, and even a kind of quiet gift, that to be awake in the deep heart of the night is to be given the rare chance to keep a watch, to hold a small light, to stand for a little while, on behalf of others, between the sleeping world and the dark. And when the long office was sung out at last, to its very end, when the final slow psalm had risen and had fallen, and the last low murmured amen had faded away into the cold worn stone, the brothers would turn and file back up the hollowed night stairs in their same quiet shuffling half-dreaming line, and lie themselves down once more in their narrow waiting beds, and draw the rough blankets back up over their cold shoulders, and take there their second sleep, the morning sleep, the kind and the gentle and the welcome second sleep, until the proper dawn came up grey at last in the east, and the bell rang out yet again to call them down to the first bright prayer of the new day. So the monk's whole night was a broken thing, asleep and then awaking and then asleep again, the very same broken and divided pattern that falls upon you, dear listener, on your own long wakeful nights, the very same rising up out of the dark in the deep middle hour. But the monk did not fear the breaking of his sleep, and he did not struggle and fight against the waking, because he had given that deep dark hour a name, and a purpose, and a meaning, and a shape. He had filled the wakeful watch right up to its brim with something steady to do and something quiet to be. And that, perhaps, is the very deepest secret of the monks, and the oldest and the truest lesson that they have to teach us across all the long centuries, that the wakeful hour is so very much easier to bear and so very much gentler to lie within, when it has been given a shape and a rhythm, when the mind that wakes alone and frightened in the dark is handed some gentle and rhythmic and familiar thing to hold on to, and to do, and to return to. The slow, worn words of a known prayer, the quiet, steady turning of the breath, the smooth, patient counting of the beads, one after another, between the fingers, anything at all, anything in the world that gives the restless and the wandering waking mind a soft and an unhurried and a well-worn path to walk slowly down, instead of leaving it to roam loose and lost and afraid out in the trackless dark. But the monks, faithful as they were very far from being the only watchers of the long medieval night. Out in the towns and the crowded cities, far from the cloister, while the brothers sang in their cold stone churches, there walked another keeper of the dark altogether, a very different sort of watcher, and that was the watchman, the man of the night watch, who paced the silent narrow streets through all the long black hours when the great town gates were shut and barred, and the house doors were bolted from within, and all the honest folk were safely obeyed. For the medieval town at night was a dark and a dangerous and a genuinely frightening place, a tangled crooked maze of narrow black streets and blind twisting alleys, with no lamps anywhere to light them, no glow at all but what spilled faint and brief from a shuttered window, a place where a man abroad after dark might easily be robbed, or knifed, or murdered for the few coins in his purse, or might simply lose his footing in the pitch black and fall and break himself upon the stones, or drown in the open stinking ditch that ran down the middle of the way. And so the town kept its watch against all of this, a body of ordinary men who walked the streets in turns all through the night, carrying a horn lantern that threw a small swinging pool of yellow light before their feet, and a stout staff or a long-bladed halberd over the shoulder, walking their slow appointed rounds, their eyes and their ears wide open in the dark, listening always for the cry of fire and the stealthy sound of thieves and any thin call of distress, trying the locks upon the doors as they passed, watching that the curfew was kept, and that no foolish soul had left a candle burning carelessly to catch the dry old timber and set the whole packed wooden town roaring up in flames before the dawn. And the great and the central work of the watchman, beyond the catching of the thief and the watching for the spark of fire, was simply this, the calling of the hours, the lifting up of his lone voice in the dark and the empty sleeping streets to tell the whole slumbering town what hour of the night it now was, and that all, so far at least, was well. He would walk his slow and his lonely round through the black and silent streets, with his lantern swinging at his side and throwing its small, brave, moving pool of light upon the cobbles and the close-leaning walls, and at each turning of the hour he would stop, and plant his staff, and lift up his voice, and call out, in the old half-sung chanting cry of the watch that was used in towns across the whole breadth of Europe, the hour of the night that it now was, and after it some few worn words of comfort and reassurance that all was well, that the town might sleep on safe and easy, that the fires were banked and the gates were shut, and the watch, the faithful watch, was being kept. And to lie awake in your own bed in such a town, restless and wakeful in the dark, and to hear that voice come floating down the empty street toward you. The lonely and the steady and the strangely tender call of the watchman telling out the hour and telling that all was well was a strange and a deep and a real comfort. The warm sound of a living human voice carried through the great dark silence, the simple knowledge that someone, after all, was awake out there in the night and walking the streets and keeping the careful watch, that you were not, in the end, alone in the dark, and many a wakeful soul, lying there listening for that voice, found in its slow and its regular return through the long hours a kind of clock, and a kind of company, and a kind of comfort, all three at once. A quiet marking off of the great and frightening expanse of the night into smaller and more bearable pieces, the watchman's cry that said again and again, faithfully, through all the dark, "It is the second hour, and all is well. It is the third hour, and all is well. Sleep on, good people. The watch is kept, the watch is kept." And there were others still, who kept the long night awake, the night workers, the ones whose labour simply could not wait upon the coming of the day. There was the baker, who rose in the very deepest and the coldest dark, hours before any other soul in the town, to rake the ashes from his great brick oven, and lay the fresh fire, and feed it until the bricks glowed and held their fierce even heat, and then to mix and to knead and to shape the heavy dough with his strong floury arms in the warm glow of the oven mouth, working his long fragrant solitary hours through the dead of the night so that the bread might be baked and risen and warm and waiting when the hungry town finally woke, and the warm yeasty smell of his baking, drifting out into the cold black streets where only the watchman walked, was the very first faint promise of the morning, the first sign abroad in the dark that the night would, after all, end, and the day would come, and there would be warm bread in it. There was the shepherd out alone upon the cold high hills in the hard weeks of the lambing season, who could not sleep at all upon those bitter nights of the early spring when the heavy ewes were giving birth, who wrapped himself close in his thick rough cloak, and built himself a small fire if he could, and kept his lonely freezing watch over the scattered flock through all the long dark, listening with all his being for the low troubled cry of a ewe in difficulty, ready to go to her across the dark wet grass, and ease the new slick lamb out into the bitter cold world, and rub it hard, and warm it back to life against his own chest, and tuck it inside his coat to keep the small flame of its life from guttering out, awake all the long night beneath the great slow wheeling stars upon the empty wind-blown hills, the loneliest watch of all of them, and surely one of the very oldest, the shepherd watching over his flock by night, a watch so ancient and so deep in the long memory of the world that it sits at the very heart of the oldest and the most beloved of all the stories. There was the fisherman who put out from the dark shore in his small boat in the black hours before the dawn, or who stayed out all the whole night long upon the cold heaving water, working his nets and his lines by the thin silver light of the moon and the stars, awake and small and alone upon the vast dark breathing sea, while all the land lay sleeping safe behind him. And there was the miller who could not always choose his hours, who ground on through the night when the river ran high and strong, or when a good wind blew fair for the sails of his mill. For the water and the wind would not wait upon his sleep, and he tended his great rumbling grinding stones in the dark, dusted white as a ghost with the flour, while the village dreamed below. And there was, above all the others, and more tender than all the others, the watch of the women, the midwife and the mother, and all those who kept the long anxious aching vigils of the birthing bed, and the sick bed, and the quiet cradle. The women who sat up through the whole of the night beside a labouring mother in her hours of struggle, or beside a small child burning and tossing with fever, or beside an old and beloved soul slipping slowly away, holding the hot dry hand, wetting the cracked lips with a little water, tending the small steady flame of the rushlight so the dark would not be total, watching the slow rise and fall of the laboured breath, listening to every change in it, keeping the patient and the loving human vigil over those great thresholds of life and of death that so very often fall, both of them, in the deep and the silent small hours of the night. For the night was the time when children most often chose to be born, and when the old most often chose to slip away. The great comings and the great goings of human life arriving most often there in the dark, and so someone always sat up and kept the watch beside them, awake and steady while the rest of the world slept, holding the small light, holding the warm hand, murmuring the low words of comfort, keeping the long tender watch of love over the ones who could not be left alone to cross over in the dark by themselves. And in the great houses and the high stone castles there was the watch of yet another kind, the night porter dozing upright at the barred gate, the lone guard pacing the cold wind-swept wall above with his spear, the trusted servant who lay rolled in a blanket across the very threshold of his lord's chamber door, the keeper of the great hall fire who rose again and again through the night to feed the hungry embers so that the vast cold hall would not go black and freezing before the morning. And in the king's own household there were always those who watched, the silent armed guards standing at the door of the royal bedchamber, awake and unmoving through every dark hour, while the king himself slept, so that the most powerful man in all the land lay down each and every night beneath the steady waking eyes of his watchers, guarded and tended and kept, while he slept exactly as the very humblest sick child was guarded and tended and kept by its own watching mother, for the deep old human need to be watched over in the dark, the need not to be left alone and undefended in the night, runs all the way up and all the way down, from the lowest cradle to the highest throne, and binds the king and the peasant child together in the one same gentle helplessness of sleep. And what binds all of these watchers together, the praying monk and the calling watchman and the lonely shepherd and the bending midwife and the flowery baker and the standing guard, what every one of them shares across all their many different vigils, is the steadiness of the thing, the patient rhythmic holding on through the long dark hours, the slow breaking of the great frightening shapeless expanse of the night into small bearable repeated pieces, the prayer said again and again, the round walked again and again, the hour called out again and again, the breath of the sleeping child watched again and again, the fire fed again and again, the steady tending of the one small flame through all the dark, for the night is most bearable and most gently borne when it is given a rhythm, when there is some slow, simple, repeated thing to hold and to do, and to come back to, again and again and again, until the very hours themselves are worn smooth and soft and round by the patient repetition, and the dawn comes up at last almost before it was expected. And there is in all of this, dear listener, a quiet and a real gift held out to you, lying here now in your own warm dark, for you too are keeping a kind of watch tonight. You too are awake in the deep hour while so much of the world lies sleeping, and you might think of yourself, just for tonight, just for this one night, not as someone cursed and afflicted and shut out from sleep, but simply as one more of that long and patient and honourable company of watchers, keeping for a little while your own quiet faithful vigil, with your own slow repeated thing to hold, the gentle rise and the gentle fall of your own breath, the slow loosening and softening of your own body down into the bed, a watch that asks nothing of you at all but to lie still and to breathe and to let the long hours pass over you until your own watch ends, as every watch ever kept has ended, in the quiet coming of sleep. For here, dear listener, is the deepest and the truest thing about every vigil that was ever kept, the one thing that joins them all, that every single one of them, without exception, ends. The monk's cold office ends, and he files back up the worn stairs to his second sleep. The watchman's long round ends, and the grey dawn comes seeping up over the rooftops, and he hangs up his lantern and goes home at last to his own waiting bed, as the city stirs and wakes around him. The shepherd's lambing watch ends with the sun rising red and cold over the eastern hills, and the new lambs standing wobbling and bleating in the bright new morning. The baker's work ends with the warm loaves drawn out and the first customers at the door. The mother's long watch at the cradle ends when the fever breaks at last in the small dark hours, and the child sighs and sinks down into an easy healing sleep, and the mother sleeps too then, slumped in her chair beside the little bed, her hand still resting upon the cool small forehead. Finally, at peace. Every watch ends. Every long dark vigil is, in the end and always, a thing with a far edge to it, a closing, an ending that is certain to come, the dawn that always, always rises, the relief that always arrives, the deep sweet sleep that comes at last to the watcher when the watch is over and done. And so it is, exactly so, with your own watch tonight. It will end. It is ending even now, even as you lie here breathing in the dark, the long hours wearing slowly smooth beneath you, the deep dark thinning by slow degrees toward the morning, your own quiet watch drawing on gently toward its close. You need only hold it a little while longer now, the way the monk holds the last slow psalm, and the watchman walks the last turn of his round. You need only lie still, and breathe, and let the steady rhythm carry you, and your watch will end, as every watch that was ever kept has ended, softly and surely, in rest. So let the long company of the watchers keep you tonight. Let the gentle thought of them gather close and warm around your bed, the monks singing low in their cold dark churches, the watchman walking his round and calling his hours through the empty streets, the lonely shepherd upon his windy hill, the mother bent over her cradle, the baker at his glowing fragrant oven, the guard standing still upon the wall beneath the stars, all of them awake in the great stillness, all of them keeping their patient faithful watch, so that no soul awake in the deep of the night need ever feel itself entirely and truly alone. For the night has always been full of quiet waking company, full of patient watchers holding up their small steady lights against the dark, and it is full of them still. And you are one of them now, just for tonight, keeping your own gentle vigil, holding your own small light, and your watch, like all the others before it, will end. The hours are wearing smooth, the dark is thinning toward the dawn, the breath is slowing of its own quiet accord, and the second sleep, the watcher's sleep, the deep and certain and faithful rest that comes at the last to everyone who has ever kept the long watch of the night, is rising up beneath you even now, quiet and warm and sure, to gather you softly in the moment your watch is done, and to carry you down, gently, the way it has carried home every weary watcher who ever held a light up against the dark before you, down and softly down into rest. And over all of this there lay the comfort of the one small kept flame, for the total dark was a thing the heart shrank from. And so against it the people kept always, if they could, a single small light burning through the night, the banked ember deliberately fed and covered to smoulder safe till morning, the little vigil lamp with its floating wick of oil, the rushlight, the stub of candle left in a dish, the night light set burning for a frightened child, the single point of warm light that says the dark is not total after all. The dark has a limit. Here is one small steady flame that the night has not put out, and the wakeful soul could fix its eye upon that small light and feel the dark grow less, feel itself less alone, the way a traveller far out upon the night road takes heart at one lit window in the distance. And there was care taken in the very laying of the bed within the room, for it was not set just anyhow, but turned and aligned by old rule, and above all the bed was not set so that the sleeper lay with the feet pointing straight out the door, for that, the people said, was the way the dead were carried out, feet first through the door, and to sleep so was to lie in the corpse's posture, and to court the dark, and so the bed was turned, the head set just so, often toward the north or toward the rising sun by the old reckonings. The sleeper laid down in the lucky alignment, in harmony with the turning of the world, lying right, lying safe. And the colour of the bed mattered too, for red, the warm, strong colour of blood and fire and life, was held across many lands to ward the dark, so that red curtains were hung about the beds of those who could afford them, and a thin red thread was tied about the wrist of an infant, and a little branch of red coral was hung at a baby's neck or upon its cradle to guard it through the night, red against the dark, the living colour standing watch over the sleeper. And the green and growing things kept their guard here too, hung not only for their medicine, but for their old protective virtue. The mugwort tucked beneath the pillow, that the country people swore brought gentle and pleasant dreams, and kept the dark ones away. The St. John's wort gathered in the bright of midsummer, and hung over the door and the window, the golden flower of the longest day held up against the longest dark. The bay and the rosemary above all that was for remembrance and for faithful sleep, and the cut onion or the head of garlic set quietly in the corner of the sick room to draw the badness out of the air, all of them breathing their old protection out into the dark, the whole green armoury of the night laid down soft about the bed. And of all these many charms and customs and quiet rituals, dear listener, do you know which one alone has come down whole and unbroken all the long way to our own night, which single one of them every wakeful child is still taught? It is the counting sheep. And it began, the old story goes, with the very shepherds we kept watch with on the cold hills, who lying down at last after the long day would count over in their drowsing minds the flock they had tended, this ewe and that lamb and the next, the slow safe telling over of the familiar known things, and it joined with that other older charm. The counting laid down to snare the spirits at the door, the seeds and the knots that must be numbered till dawn. And it became at last the gentlest sleep trick in all the world, the laying out before the restless mind of a long line of small identical untroubling things to be numbered slowly, one and then another, until the counting wears the wakefulness thin and smooth, until the mind grows so mild and so dull and so absorbed in its soft endless tally that it forgets at last to turn over its troubles, and forgets to listen for the dark, and forgets even that it was trying to sleep at all, and slips somewhere between one number and the next, without ever noticing the moment of it, down and away into the dark. So you need not lay the iron or scatter the seed tonight, dear listener, nor comb 100 strokes, nor feed the spirit by the hearth, for all of it was only ever the one same thing, wearing 100 different shapes, the slow telling of the body that the day is done, and the night is kept, and there is nothing left to guard against, and nothing left to fear. And you may have that same deep certainty now, without a single charm, lying just as you are. The flame is kept, the bed is turned right, the worries are all handed down into small waiting hands beneath your pillow. The dolls hold them now, you need not. Every old protection of every sleepless soul that ever lived is laid quietly about you where you lie, and you are warded, and you are guarded, and you are held, and there is nothing in all the world left for you to do but let your breath grow slow, and let the warmth climb up from your feet through your heavy quiet body, and let the long count begin, one soft number, and then another, the sheep going by, the seeds being told, the slow safe numbering of the gentle untroubling things, on and on, until the numbers blur and soften and run together, until the dark grows kind, until the deep old tide rises up beneath you of its own accord and gathers you in and carries you down past the kept flame and the warded door and the small hands holding your cares, down and gently down, where there is no more counting and no more guarding and no more night, but only the warm boundless quiet, only rest, only sleep. Think now, before you let yourself go down, of the place itself, the place you are lying in, the bed, the small raised, warm, soft, safe island that you have made for yourself against the night. And think of how very old that island is, how the simple wish that lifts you now a little way up off the cold floor of the world, and wraps you round in warmth and softness, is one of the oldest wishes there has ever been. Older than the cities, older than the fields, older very nearly than the people themselves, for there has never been a soul anywhere upon the earth who did not want, at the end of the day, somewhere to lie down, and who did not set about, with whatever poor things came to hand, making that somewhere a little softer and a little warmer and a little safer than the bare cold ground. And tonight, as you lie in your own bed in your own dark, we are going to travel back through all the beds there have ever been, through the straw and the feathers and the furs and the rope and the wood, through the great curtained beds of kings and the bare-swept corners of the poor, and we are going to find in all of them the same one tender human thing, the making of a place to lie down, the building, every single night, of a small warm refuge against the dark. And perhaps in the long telling of it you will feel how your own bed tonight is only the newest in that endless line, the latest small island in a sea of beds stretching back to the very beginning, all of them made for the very same reason, all of them holding the very same hope. It began, surely, on the ground, with the first weary creatures who were our distant kin, lying down at the day's end where the day's end found them. But even then, even at the very first, there was the reaching for something better than the bare earth, the scraping together of a heap of dry grass, the gathering of fallen leaves, the pulling close of soft branches and bracken into a yielding pile, the laying down of a hide or a skin once there were hides and skins. For the bare ground is cold, and the cold of the ground reaches up all night long and steals the warmth out of a sleeping body. And so from the very beginning the sleepers of the world gathered up whatever was soft and whatever was dry, and made themselves a nest, the way the birds make a nest, and the way the beasts make a bed of trampled grass, the deep old animal instinct to round out a soft hollow and curl down into it, safe and warm and gathered in. And they slept near the fire, close by the one warm bright thing in all the dark, drawn up to it the way every living thing is drawn to warmth. And they slept together, heaped close, body against body, for the warmth that is made between sleeping bodies and shared, the oldest blanket there is, the blanket of one another. And they slept, when they could, with their backs to a wall of stone or a wall of earth or the close side of a cave, with the fire before them and the rock behind them, guarded on the one side by the warmth and on the other by the stone, the way you yourself even now may like to lie with your back to something solid and your face to the open room, the old wish to be covered behind and to see before, the sleeping posture older than memory. And then, slowly, across the long ages, the sleepers of the world learnt to lift themselves up off the ground. For the ground was not only cold, but full of small crawling troubling things, the damp that rose, the insects, the things that moved in the night, and so they raised the bed, first only a little, a low platform of branches, a heap built up thick and high, a pallet of straw laid upon a frame of wood, to lift the sleeper a hand's breadth up into the warmer air, away from the cold breath of the earth and the things that crept along it. And this small lifting up, this raising of the sleeping place above the floor, was one of the quiet great inventions of the human night, repeated and discovered over and over by peoples who never met. The raised bed, the platform, the frame, the getting up off the ground at last. And upon the raised frame they laid the mattress, the great sack stuffed full of whatever softness the land and the season gave, and the stuffing of the mattress was the whole measure of a person's place in the world. For the poorest lay upon straw, plain straw, the dry stalks of the grain after the harvest, gathered and stuffed into a coarse sack. And straw is not so bad when it is fresh. It is springy, and it smells of the summer field, but it packs down flat and hard with the nights, and it must be shaken up and turned, and at last thrown out and replaced. And the very poorest of all had only a thin pallet of it laid straight upon the floor, or slept in the very straw of the byre among the warm breathing beasts, sharing the animals' bedding and the animals' heat. And a little above the straw there was the chaff and the husk, the dry rustling leavings of the threshing, and the dried stalks of the beans and the peas, and the bracken from the hillside, and the soft tips of the heather in the high cold north, gathered in great armfuls and laid springy and fragrant beneath the sleeper. And above these there was the wool, the carded fleece of the sheep, stuffed soft and warm and yielding into the tick, a fine thing, a thing the comfortable could afford, warm in a way the straw never was, holding the body's heat, and above the wool, the very summit of all softness, there were the feathers, and above the feathers the down, the soft small breast feathers of the goose and the duck, stuffed into the finest closest cloth, so they would not work their way out. A mattress of down that a body sinks into as into a warm cloud, that holds the sleeper as gently as water holds a floating thing. The bed of the rich, the bed of the king, light as a held breath and warm as a nest, and the great feather bed was a treasure beyond price, handed down, named in the wills, the soft summit of the long climb up from the cold hard ground, and beneath the head there was the bolster and the pillow, for the head too wants lifting and wants softness, and the long bolster ran the whole width of the bed, to raise the head and the shoulders, stuffed like the mattress according to one's means, with straw or wool or down, and upon it the smaller, softer pillow. And here too there was a whole world of difference between the ranks, for the poor laid their heads upon a rolled cloth, a sack of chaff, a smooth log even, a wooden block or a shaped stone, a hard rest for a hard life, while the rich sank their heads into pillows of the softest down cased in fine linen, scented with lavender and rose. And there were the small herb pillows we have spoken of, the little bags of hops and chamomile slipped beneath, and the whole soft architecture of the head's resting was built up, layer upon careful layer, to cradle the one part of the body that holds all the thinking and all the dreaming, to lift it and to soften it, and to lay it down in scent and in softness for the night. And the frame that held all this aloft was itself a wonder of patient making, for the better beds were strung, not solid, a stout wooden frame with holes bored through the rails, and a stout rope laced back and forth across them, over and under, side to side and end to end, woven into a taut springing lattice upon which the mattress lay, and the rope would slacken and sag with the nights and the weight, and so it had to be tightened, drawn up tight again with a wooden tool made for the purpose, a key or a lever that gripped the rope and hauled it taut, and a well-strung bed slept firm and springing, while a slack one sagged and let the sleeper roll to the middle, so that the tightening of the bed was one of the small regular labours of the household, the drawing up of the ropes, the testing of the spring, the making of the bed firm and good for the night. And from this old labour comes the old fond wish, said still to the one going up to sleep tight, to lie upon a bed drawn taut and firm, to rest well upon ropes well tightened, sleep tight, the oldest good night there is. And almost no one in all the long history of the bed slept alone, and almost no one thought it strange to share. The whole family slept together, the parents and the small children in the one great bed, the bigger children in another, the baby in its small rocking cradle close by the mother's hand, or tucked warm into the bed between, all of them breathing together in the dark, warm against the cold. And this was not poverty merely, but custom and comfort both, for the shared bed was the warm bed, and to sleep alone was to sleep cold and to sleep lonely, and the warmth of the others was a thing wanted and welcomed. And it went far beyond the family, for at the inns and the lodging-houses along the roads of the old world, the weary traveller did not expect a bed to himself, and would have been astonished at the thought. but lay down in a great shared bed beside whatever other travellers had taken the road that day. Strangers all, packed in together head to foot beneath the one coverlet. For the bed was a place to be rented by the body in it, and a wide bed held 3 or 4 or 5 travellers easily, all of them strangers, all of them sharing the warmth and the snoring and the long night, and thinking nothing of it, for that was simply how the road was, and how the night was, the shared warmth of strangers in the dark. And there was the old country custom of the young, the courting custom of the cold lands, where a young man and a young woman who were sweethearts might be allowed to lie together through the night, wrapped each separately and a board set between them, to talk and to be close and to keep warm in the long winter dark. Watched over by custom, if not by eyes, the bundling of the northern winters, the closeness allowed against the cold, and the rich, who could afford to be warm in other ways, made of the bed a small private room within the larger room, the great bed, the 4 tall posts rising at the corners, and a frame across the top, and from it the heavy curtains hung down on every side, drawn close at night all round, so that the sleeper lay enclosed in a small dark warm chamber of cloth, sealed away from the great cold draughty room beyond, from the cold that poured off the stone walls and crept under the doors, from the eyes of the servants who slept upon the floor, the curtains holding in the warmth of the body and the warmth of the warming pan, and making of the bed a snug dark nest within the hall, a room you could close yourself into, a bed you could pull shut around you like a shell. And tucked low beneath this great bed, on its little wheels, there was often the truckle bed, the small low trundle bed that rolled out at night for the servant or the child or the close attendant to sleep upon at the foot of the master, rolled out into the dark and rolled away again by day, so that even the great chamber held its hierarchy of beds, the high soft curtained bed of the lord, and the low hard rolling bed of the servant beneath it, the 2 of them sleeping the one room, near and yet a whole world apart. And in the cold far corners of the world the people made the bed warmer still and snugger still, and built the box bed, the bed shut up within wooden walls like a great cupboard set against the wall of the room, with sides and a back and a top of wood, and only a small opening or a sliding panel or a little curtained door to climb in through, so that the sleeper crawled into a small wooden box of a bed and pulled the panel half to behind, sealed up tight and warm in the dark wooden shell. The cold of the great room shut entirely out, the body's own warmth held close in the little wooden chamber, and folk slept in those box beds warm as anything through the bitter winters of the cold lands, sealed away, enclosed, safe in the dark of the wooden walls. And in the warm lands they did the very opposite, and fled the heat, and slept out upon the flat roofs of the houses under the open stars, where the night air moved cool, or in the open courtyard, or upon a light frame strung with cord that let the air pass through beneath, the cool bed for the hot night, just as the box bed was the warm bed for the cold one, the same wish, the same care, the same making of a place fit to lie down in, only turned now against the heat instead of against the cold. And there were the peoples who slung the bed up in the air entirely, the hammock woven of cord and hung between 2 trees or 2 posts, swaying gently above the ground and its crawling things, rocking the sleeper as the cradle rocks the child. And the sailors took the hammock to sea and slept slung in rows in the swaying belly of the ship, rocked all night by the very rolling of the sea that would have kept a landsman sick and sleepless, swaying, swaying in the dark hold. And there were the peoples who laid the bed out fresh each night and rolled it away each morning, the soft padded quilt unrolled upon the clean floor at the day's end, and folded and put away by day, so the room might serve for living, the bed that came out only for the night and vanished with the dawn, the room that was a bedroom only while the dark lasted. And there were the peoples who warmed the very bed itself from beneath, who built the sleeping platform of brick, and ran the smoke and the heat of the kitchen fire through hollow channels beneath it, so that the whole broad bed grew warm from below all through the night, the warm brick platform that the cold family climbed up onto and slept upon, warm as bread. The heated bed of the cold east, the smoke of the evening fire keeping the sleepers warm long into the freezing dark. But for all these many shapes, the bed was, everywhere and always, far more than a place merely to sleep. For the bed was the great stage of the whole of human life, the one place where nearly all of it happened. It was upon the bed that life began, in the dark closeness of the marriage bed. It was upon the bed that life came into the world, in the long labour and the sudden cry of the birthing bed, where the mother fought her hours, and the midwife waited, and the new soul drew its first breath. It was in the bed that the sick lay through their fevers and their long recoverings, tended and watched. The sick bed where the body fought its quiet wars. And it was in the bed, at the very last, that nearly every soul who ever lived left the world again, in the deathbed, surrounded by the family, the priest, the last words, the slow ebbing of the breath, the same warm familiar bed that had cradled the whole of a life now cradling the leaving of it. And very often it was the same bed for all of it, the one great bed of the household in which a person had been conceived and born, in which they had slept every night of their childhood pressed warm against their kin, in which they had lain as a young married soul, in which their own children had been born, in which they had sweated out their illnesses and lain awake through their sleepless nights, and at the last closed their eyes for good. One bed, the whole of a life passing across it, and then handed on, named carefully in the will, the great bed, the best bed, left the eldest child or the dearest one, carried to a new house, and there beginning again, cradling new beginnings and new endings, one bed serving life after life after life down the long generations, the most valuable and the most human thing the household owned. And so when you lie down tonight, dear listener, in your own bed, in your own dark, know that you lie down in the newest link of that long unbroken chain, the latest of all the beds, the inheritor of the heaped grass and the pile of leaves and the straw pallet and the rope-strung frame and the great curtained bed and the warm wooden box and the swaying hammock and the heated brick and the soft unrolled quilt, all of them, every one, made by tired hopeful hands for the one same reason yours was made, to lift a weary body a little way up off the cold hard ground of the world, and to wrap it round in warmth, and to soften it, and to make it safe, and to give it at the end of the long day somewhere good to lie down. Every bed that ever was made out of that one tenderness, and your own bed holds you in it now, so feel the softness of it beneath you, the lift of it holding you up off the cold floor of the world, the warmth of it gathered close around your body, and feel how it is the very same warmth, the very same softness, the very same lifting up and holding safe that every sleeper of every age has lain down into before you, the whole long line of them, all the way back to the first soul who ever gathered a heap of dry grass against the cold and curled down into it by the fire. You are held now exactly as they were held. You are lifted and warmed and softened and kept exactly as they were kept. There is nothing left to do but sink into it. So let your body grow heavy now, and let the bed take all the weight of it, all of it, every last ounce. Let the bed hold you up, so that you need hold nothing at all. Let the warmth gather and the softness rise around you, and let yourself sink, slow and deep, into the newest and the oldest bed in all the world, down past the day, down past the dark, down into the warm, soft, safe, deep place that has been made and remade for the weary every single night since the very beginning of the world, and is made now, tonight, for you, down and gently down into rest. There is a moment in the very deepest part of the night that comes to all the world at once. The same moment in the cottage and the castle and the camp and the ship. The moment when the night reaches its lowest and its stillest point and seems to stop, to hold, to hang motionless in the dark before it begins, slowly, to turn back toward the morning. And we are going to rest there now, dear listener, you and I, in that one still motionless hour at the bottom of the night, the hour that every sleeper who has ever lived has passed through, the deep trough of the dark, where the whole world lies down together and breathes as one, and we are going to lie there in it, quiet and warm and held, and let it carry us all the way down, slow and soft and unafraid, into the place where there is nothing left but rest. For all across the sleeping earth, in this deepest hour, the same great stillness lies upon everything that lives. The fires have all burned down to their last red coals, banked and covered to hold a little warmth till morning. The lamps are out, the candles guttered and dark. The streets of the towns are empty and silent, the watchman's lonely round drawing on toward its close, his lantern a small moving point of gold far off in the dark. The roads between the towns lie pale and empty under the stars, no traveller upon them. The inns dark and full of sleeping strangers, heaped warm beneath their shared coverlets. The great houses are still, the curtained beds drawn close, the servants asleep upon their pallets on the floor. The fire in the great hall sunk low, the dogs curled nose to tail before it. The monasteries are quiet between their offices, the brothers fallen back into their second sleep in the long cold dormitories, the church dark and empty, waiting for the bell. The ships ride at anchor, or run slow before the night wind, the sailors slung sleeping in their swaying hammocks below, rocked by the same sea that bears them on. The shepherd dozes on his hill, wrapped in his cloak, the flock a pale huddle in the dark around him, the new lambs sleeping against their mother's warmth. The fields lie silver and still under the moon, the grain standing motionless, not a breath of wind to stir it. And in all the numberless beds of all the world, the people sleep, the whole vast sleeping multitude of them, the rich and the poor, the young and the old, the king and the beggar, all of them laid down in the dark, all of them breathing slow and deep and even, all of them carried together through the bottom of the night, and you among them now, one of that great sleeping company, lying here in your own warm dark, breathing slow with all the rest. And how strange and how tender it is, when you think of it, that this is the one thing that joins every soul who has ever lived, across every age and every land and every difference that ever divided them, that all of them, every one, lay down each night and slept, that the proudest emperor and the humblest slave alike closed their eyes each night and gave themselves up helpless to the dark, that for all their wars and all their gold and all their great differences they were, every night, brought down to the same simple thing, a warm body in a bed in the dark, breathing slow, needing rest, gathered down into sleep exactly as you are gathered down now. The pharaohs slept, the Caesars slept, the kings in their great curtained beds, and the peasants in their straw, the scholars and the soldiers and the sailors and the saints, all of them slept. All of them passed through this same deep trough of the night that you are passing through now. All of them let go of the day and sank down into the dark and were carried, and woke, and slept again, night after night, all the days of their lives, until the last night came, and the last sleep, the long one, from which there is no waking, and even that the old peoples called only a sleep, a rest, a lying down, for it seemed to them that sleep and death were near kin, two doors close together in the same dark wall, the small nightly door through which we pass and return, and the great final door through which we pass and do not. And they laid their dead down gently, hands folded, eyes closed, in the posture of sleep, and said of them that they had fallen asleep, that they were resting now, that they had only lain down at last to take the long rest after the long day. And there was a deep comfort in that old way of seeing it, the comfort of thinking of the great dark not as a terror, but as a sleep, a rest, a being gathered home at the end of the labour, the same gentle sinking into the warm dark that every weary soul knows and longs for at the end of every long day, only longer, only deeper, only without the morning, the great rest, the long sleep, the lying down from which one is not called to rise. But you are not at that door tonight, dear listener. You are at the small nightly one, the kind one, the one that opens onto sleep and onto the morning that lies beyond it, and through that small door you may pass now, gently and without fear, knowing that the morning waits on the far side of it, that you will wake, that the dark you sink into now is only the dark of the night and not the dark of the end, only the warm, brief, healing dark out of which the morning always, always rises, for the morning does rise. That is the other half of the old comfort, the half that balances the dark, that the night, however long and however deep, always ends. It has never once failed to end, not in all the history of the world, not on the longest and the blackest and the coldest night that ever was. The morning came, the dark thinned and greyed and paled at the edge of the world. The stars went out one by one, the birds woke and began their first thin, sleepy songs in the cold, and the light came back, as it has come back every single morning since the beginning of everything, faithful, certain, sure as anything has ever been sure, and the people of the old world, who knew the dark far better and far more deeply than we ever can, who lay in a blackness we can scarcely imagine, knew also this certainty of the morning, held on to it through the long nights, the cock that crowed before the dawn and tore the dark, the bell that rang the first hour of the light, the grey that came at last to the window, and they trusted it, the coming of the morning, the way you may trust it now, lying here, that however long this night the morning is coming, is already on its way, is even now far off beyond the dark edge of the world, making ready to rise, so that you may let go of the night completely, may sink all the way down into it without holding back even a little, knowing that you are held safe in the brief warm dark between two mornings, the morning behind you that you woke to once, and the morning ahead of you that will wake you again, and between them only this, only the kind dark, only the rest, only the sleep. So let the whole world sleep around you now, and sleep with it. Feel how you are not alone in the dark, never were alone in it, but are one small warm sleeping body among the numberless sleeping bodies of all the world and all the ages, all of you carried together through the same deep night, all of you breathing the same slow breath of sleep, the great quiet multitude of the sleeping stretching away from your own warm bed in every direction and back through all of time. The sleepers of tonight, and the sleepers of 1,000 years ago, and the sleepers of the very first night of the world, all of them laid down in the dark, all of them let go, all of them carried, and you among them, held in the same arms that held them all. There is nothing strange in what is happening to you now. It is the oldest and the most ordinary thing there is, the thing every living soul has done at the end of every day since the beginning, the simple laying down of the body, and the letting go of the mind, and the sinking into the warm dark. And your own body knows how to do it, knew how before you ever learned anything else, knows how this very moment, if you will only let it, if you will only stop holding on and let the old knowledge take you down. So stop holding on. There is nothing left to hold. The day is gone, set down behind you, finished. Tomorrow is not yet here, and will keep until it comes. There is only this, only now, only the warm dark, and the soft bed, and the slow breath, and the great sleeping world all around you, and there is nothing for you to do in it at all, nothing to think, and nothing to solve, and nothing to guard, and nothing to fear, nowhere to be, and no one to be, nothing at all but to lie here and breathe, and grow heavy, and let go, and sink. Let the breath lead you down, do not force it, do not shape it, only let it be, and notice how it slows of its own accord, how it deepens, how it grows long and soft and even, the breath that has carried you through every moment of your life without your asking, carrying you now down and down, with every long slow exhale, sinking you a little deeper, a little further, a little softer into the warm dark, the way a small boat settles lower and lower into still water, as the night comes on, drifting, sinking, slow and safe and held. Let the body grow heavier with each breath, heavier than you have ever let it be, the shoulders sinking, the arms sinking, the legs grown warm and heavy and still, the whole weight of you given over completely to the bed that holds you, so that you hold nothing, carry nothing, support nothing, but are held entirely, carried entirely, the bed beneath you, and the dark around you, and the great sleeping world enfolding you, all of it holding you up, so that you may let everything go. And let the mind grow quiet now, the way the world has grown quiet, the way the streets are empty, and the fires are banked, and the lamps are out. Let the last thoughts of the day grow dim and slow and far away. Let them drift off one by one into the dark, like the stars going out before the dawn. Let them go, do not follow them, do not finish them, only watch them grow faint, and fainter and fade, until the mind is dark and quiet and still as the sleeping fields under the moon, empty, peaceful, at rest, nothing moving in it, nothing left in it but the slow, soft sound of your own breathing, rising and falling, carrying you down, and feel now, beneath all of it, beneath the heavy, quiet body, and the dark, still mind, and the great sleeping world, feel the tide, the slow, soft, certain tide of sleep, rising up underneath you in the dark, the oldest tide there is, the one that has risen beneath every sleeper of every age and carried them all gently down, rising now beneath you, lifting you, taking you, the way the sea takes a thing that floats, the way the dark takes the day, gently, surely, without effort and without asking, gathering you in, drawing you down, down past the edge of waking, down past the last faint flicker of thought, down past the place where the words stop, and there is only the warm and the dark and the deep, the boundless quiet deep, where there is no time, and no trouble, and no night, and no waiting, where there is nothing at all left to do, or to be, or to hold, where there is only rest, only warmth, only the long sweet falling that has been waiting for you all night, patient and certain as the morning to gather you home. Let it take you now, let it carry you down. There is nothing left to do but go, soft and slow and unafraid, down into the dark that is kind, down into the sleep that always comes, down and gently down, with all the sleeping world around you, and the morning shore beyond the dark, down into rest, into the warm, into the deep, into sleep, into sleep, into sleep, where you are held, and you are carried, and you are home, and all is well, and all is well, and all is well. And it is happening now, though you cannot feel the exact moment of it, the slow turning of the night, for the dark has reached its lowest place, the deep still bottom of the long descent, and now, so gradually that no eye could ever catch it, the whole great wheel of the night begins, by the smallest of degrees, to turn back up again toward the morning, the way the tide, having drawn all the way out across the wide flats until the sea seems gone forever, pauses and hangs, and then, without any sign you could point to, begins to come back in, so quietly at first that you would swear it had not moved at all, and then a little more, and a little more, until the certainty of it grows and grows. And the same is happening to the night around you now, the dark turning, the night beginning its slow patient climb back toward the light, carrying you with it, carrying you up out of the deepest hour toward the morning that you need not wait for and need not watch for. That will come of its own accord while you sleep. That is coming even now, far off, unhurried, sure, so that you may let the dark hold you completely, may give yourself wholly to it, knowing that you are not sinking into something endless, but only resting in the deep warm trough of one single night that is already, even as you lie here, turning gently back toward the day. And all across the sleeping world it is the same deep stillness, the same slow turning. In the desert, where the caravan has halted for the night, the camels are folded down upon the cooling sand in a great patient ring, and the people sleep wrapped in their cloaks between them, the fire a low red eye in the centre, the vast cold stars wheeling slow and bright and enormous overhead, the whole desert silent to its far black edges, and the night turns there too, the great stars sliding westward by imperceptible degrees toward the dawn that waits below the rim of the sand. In the fishing village by the cold sea, the boats are drawn up on the shingle, and the nets hung to dry, and the small houses dark, and the only sound is the long, slow breathing of the waves upon the stones, in and out, the oldest lullaby there is, and the fisher folk sleep to it as they have always slept, rocked even in their beds by the remembered motion of the sea, and the tide there is truly turning, the real tide of the real sea, drawing slowly back up the shingle toward the morning. In the high mountain monastery, far above the world, the brothers sleep between the offices in the thin cold air, and the great peaks stand white and silent all around under the moon. And the night turns over the mountains as it turns over the sea and the sand, the same night, the one night, lying soft over the whole turning world. In the great city, the streets lie empty under the few small lamps, and behind 10,000 dark windows 10,000 sleepers lie breathing slow, the rich in their curtained beds, and the poor in their narrow ones, and the children warm between, the whole city sunk down together into the same deep hour, the same dark, the same rest, and the night turns over the city too, drawing it slowly up toward the grey that will come at last to the eastern rooftops. And you are part of all of it, one small warm sleeping point among the numberless sleeping points of the whole wide world, all of you held together in the one turning night, all of you breathing the one slow breath of sleep, all of you carried together, gently, surely, toward the one morning that comes to all of you at once. So let your own body sink now, slowly, the way the whole world has sunk into its rest, and let it go heavy from the very crown of your head all the way down to the tips of your toes, slow and complete and unhurried, taking all the time there is, for there is nothing now but time, the whole soft dark depth of the night spread out around you with nothing in it that you must do. Begin at the top, at the scalp, and feel it loosen. Feel the tiny muscles there that you never think of let go all at once. A warm, soft loosening spreading down across the brow, smoothing the forehead, every line of the day's thinking smoothing away, until the brow is as still and as smooth as the surface of a pond at the windless dawn. Let it flow down into the eyes, and let the eyes grow heavy and still, resting deep in their sockets. The eyelids soft and heavy and closed, no longer holding even the smallest tension, just resting, just lying gently shut over the quiet eyes. Let it flow into the cheeks, and let them soften, and the small muscles around the mouth let go. And the jaw that holds so much, let it unclench and hang loose and easy. The teeth unclenched, the tongue resting soft and low in the mouth, the whole face fallen open and slack and peaceful, the face of the deeply sleeping, untroubled, smooth. And down into the neck now, the warm loosening flowing down, all the tension of the long day draining out of the neck, the muscles letting go their grip, the head settling deeper and heavier into the soft pillow, held, supported, needing to hold itself up no longer, the neck soft, the head heavy and resting, sinking down, and out across the shoulders, those broad shoulders that have carried so much for so long, and feel them drop and drop again, lower and lower still, melting down away from the ears, spreading wide and heavy and loose into the bed, all the weight of the day's carrying pouring out of them, and down and away, the shoulders soft and heavy and free. And down the arms now, the warm heaviness flowing slow down the upper arms, loosening them, and into the elbows, and down the forearms, and into the wrists, and out into the hands that did so much today, that gripped and held and worked. Let them open now, let the fingers uncurl, and lie soft and still, and slightly parted upon the bed, the palms easy, the hands so heavy now, so warm and so heavy, that you could not lift them if you wished to, and you do not wish to. You wish only to feel them lie there, given over, resting, done, and the warmth flowing down into the chest now, and feel the breath there, slow and deep and easy, the chest rising and falling of its own accord, asking nothing, the breath that has carried you all your life carrying you still, down, with every long, slow out-breath sinking you a little deeper, a little softer, a little further into the warm dark, the chest loose, the breath slow, the ribs soft and easy, with each gentle rise and fall. Down into the belly, soft and warm, and rising and falling with the breath, all the tightness there letting go, the whole centre of you soft and warm and at peace. Down into the back, the long tired back, every muscle along the spine letting go one by one from the top to the bottom, the back sinking heavy into the bed, fully supported, fully held, releasing all its long day's weight downward into the soft mattress that holds you. Down into the hips, and let them grow heavy and loose and wide, settling, sinking, all the weight of you pooling down now into the lower body, heavy and warm, and down the legs, the long strong legs that bore you up and carried you through the whole of the day, down through the thighs, growing heavy, growing warm, growing still, and into the knees, and down the calves, and into the ankles, and out at the very last into the feet, the warm tired feet, and feel the warmth pool there, and gather there, and rest there. The feet heavy and warm, and entirely still, the whole body now, from crown to sole, let go, heavy, warm, sinking, given over completely to the bed and the dark, holding nothing, carrying nothing, doing nothing, only resting, only sinking, only being held, and the mind grown quiet now, quiet as the whole quiet world, the thoughts grown slow and dim and far away, drifting off one by one into the soft dark, like the last few stars going out before the coming grey. And you do not follow them, you do not reach after them, you only watch them grow faint and fainter, and let them go, until the mind is still and dark and peaceful as the sleeping fields under the setting moon, nothing moving in it, nothing pulling at it, nothing left in it at all but the slow soft sound of your own gentle breathing, in and out, the one quiet sound in all the quiet dark, rising and falling, carrying you down, and far off, so far off that it does not disturb you in the least, only reassures you. The night is beginning to thin at its furthest edge, the very first faintest greyness gathering low in the east beyond the dark rim of the world, the stars beginning, one by one, the brightest first, to soften and to pale, and somewhere out in the cold a single early bird stirs upon its branch and clears its small throat, and begins, very softly, the first thin thread of its sleepy morning song, and it is a sound of comfort, that first far bird, a sound that says the night has turned and the morning is truly coming, that the dark you rest in now is the kind brief dark before the dawn, that you may sink all the way down into it without any fear at all, for you will wake in the soft new light, rested and whole, and the morning will be there, sure and gentle and bright, waiting for you on the far side of the sleep. But that is far off yet, far off, and there is a long sweet depth of dark still left to rest in before it, a long warm fall still ahead of you into the deep, and you need not hurry toward the morning, need not reach for it, need only let it come of its own accord while you sink down now, slow and deep, into the warm dark that holds you. For the tide is rising still beneath you, the old soft certain tide of sleep, rising and rising in the dark, gathering you in, lifting you, taking you, the way the sea takes a thing that floats and bears it gently out, the way the dark takes the day, slow and sure, and without any effort at all. And you have only to let it, only to stop holding on, only to give yourself over to the rising of it, and it carries you down and down, past the heavy quiet body, past the dark still mind, past the last faint flicker of any thought, down past the very edge of waking, to that soft place where the words begin to blur and slow and run together, where the meaning loosens and falls away, and there is only the sound and the warmth and the slow descent, down further still, into the deep, warm, boundless dark, where there is no time, and no trouble, and no waiting, and no night, where there is nothing at all left to do, or to be, or to hold, or to fear, where there is only rest, only warmth, only the long, slow, sweet falling that has waited for you, patient and kind and certain, all the night long, to gather you home. Let it take you now. Let it carry you all the way down. There is nothing left, dear listener, nothing left in all the world but to go, soft and slow and unafraid, down into the dark that is kind, down into the sleep that always, always comes, down past the warm cup cooling and the warm stone at your feet, down past the watchers keeping their watch, down past the whole sleeping world breathing slow around you, down beneath the turning night and the far grey dawn, down and down, and gently down, into the warm, into the deep, into the still, into rest, into sleep, into sleep, into sleep, where you are held, and you are carried, and you are kept, and you are home, and there is nothing more, and there is nothing more, and all is well, and all is well, and all is well.